when he died saving another life, expecting a quick second chance, but instead he woke up in a world where he wasn't the hero, he was just the meal, in a land ruled by powerful monster girls. Humans like him are rare, valuable, and dangerously appetizing, meaning every single encounter could be his last. If he wants to survive, he must do the impossible, convince the deadliest predator around not to eat him, and maybe even make her an ally. Could he survive this world as a snack? Before we find out, hit subscribe and then let's jump into his story. He called out into the void, his voice fading into total nothingness as if it had never even existed. This had to be a coma. He had been floating here so long he lost all sense of time, and even though he had never heard of a coma like this, he couldn't think of anything else. It could be one moment he was standing at a bus stop, waiting like any other ordinary day, and the next, he threw himself in front of a truck to push a kid out of its path. Now he was here, endless black nothing, no pain, no fear, no sense of time passing, just waiting. He had never heard of an afterlife like this, either, which only made him believe it had to be a coma. Then a voice spoke up from behind him, cold, monotone, and completely indifferent. There was no kindness, but no cruelty either, just a flat, unwavering presence carrying a weight he couldn't ignore. It apologized for taking so long to find him. He turned toward the voice, and the moment he did, he came face to face with something he could only describe as death itself. Massive skeleton, easily 10 feet tall, loomed over him. Hellish fire burned inside its empty eye sockets, and black smoke drifted around it, carrying faint, screaming faces that twisted together like a river forming its robes. In its left hand it held a twisted scythe resting on its shoulder, the handle long, slender bone topped with a skull, and from that skull's mouth extended a curved obsidian blade. He stared at it, taking everything in, and oddly enough, he didn't feel afraid. He admitted that he probably should have been scared, but he wasn't, and with that, he accepted that the coma theory was no longer possible. It observed that he was handling the news of his death well. He responded that while the news was grim, after months of isolation, it was strangely comforting. Especially knowing that death apparently wasn't the end. That was when it corrected him, explaining that he had been here far longer than months, and that time flowed differently in a place called limbo. That immediately caught his attention, and he asked how long it had really been, while also questioning whether it was something like the Grim Reaper or even a god. It cut that thought off immediately, stating that it was not God, but merely an overseer. It warned him that there were others like it who had fallen into arrogance and falsely claimed divinity, and it advised him to be cautious of such beings in whatever came next. He accepted that and told himself to remember it, but what really stuck with him was something else. It had said new life, so he asked directly if that meant he was being reincarnated, and more importantly, if it was into another world. He couldn't help but imagine everything, which is dragons, princesses, the whole fantasy package. It confirmed it without hesitation. As it spoke, it turned and began walking, and even though there was surrounded by a vast, empty void, he followed. The entity explained that since he was hit by a truck, a strange cosmic law dictated he must be sent to another world and reborn instead of moving on. That made him pause for a moment. He questioned if getting hit by a truck actually triggered reincarnation into some fantasy world, because it sounded less like reality and more like an overused trope. The guide simply replied that art imitates life. He did not even know how to argue with that. Then he remembered the kid and asked about him, wondering what happened after he pushed the boy out of the way. The guide said it could not comment on the boy's life directly, but assured him that he saved the kid. If he had not acted, the child would have died and reborn alone in a world far too cruel for someone so young. That was enough for him. A quiet sense of relief settled in, and for the first time since his death, he was genuinely glad he did it. He introduced himself properly. Realizing he had not done so yet, the being returned the courtesy, identifying itself as the overseer of death for the world he was about to enter. After that, he decided to ask the one question that mattered most. In stories from his old world, people who get reincarnated usually receive some kind of overpowered ability, so he asked what he would get, and brace yourself here. Absolutely nothing. The guide told him he was quite average, though it added that because he had spent so much time in limbo, where souls normally rest between lives, his time being lost there had slightly improved his vitality. He paused, trying To process this, then asked if that meant he was at least strong or hard to kill. Instead of answering him directly, the being turned and leveled its massive scythe. The skull embedded in the weapon locked onto him, and from that angle, the black blade extending from its mouth looked disturbingly like a tongue. It felt like it was mocking him, silently laughing at the idea he could ever defy death itself. Then it answered 2 strikes would be enough to kill him, and the second would be a mercy. He let that sink in before admitting that he really was nothing special. Honestly, who could blame him for feeling disappointed? The guide turned away again and continued walking, stating he was still better than most, but all mortals eventually meet death. He could not help but wonder if that meant he had any chance at all of becoming a hero. It told him it did not know, as that was not within its vision, but said that being average did not disqualify him from that possibility. That sparked a bit of hope, so he pushed further, asking if there was something like an adventurer's guild he could join. It told him that upon arrival, he would find himself in a forest east of a city called Jaffe, and if he wanted to live a life different from his previous one, there was a monster hunting guild there. Then it gave him one final piece of advice: find the deadliest person there. Not long after that, it stopped walking, even though the surroundings had not changed at all. He somehow understood that they had reached the end, so this was where they parted ways, he told. He wished it well, even if he was not entirely sure how appropriate that was, and thanked it, because regardless of everything, he owed it more than he could ever put into words. Then, acting on instinct, he held out his hand. For a moment, the entity just looked at him, as if deciding if he was worth acknowledging. Then, with a gentle movement like a soft sigh, the entity reached out and gently grasped his hand. It was not cold, nor was it burning. It felt warm, like the gentle death told of in old legends. At that moment, he could sense 3 distinct presences within the entity: an indifferent voice, a cold scythe, and a surprisingly comforting guide. It bade him farewell, advising him to stay far away from death, doing his best to avoid it, hoping they wouldn't meet again for a long time. Then in an instant, everything shifted. Blinding sunlight flooded his vision as the wind brushed his skin, carrying the sweet scent of flowers. He could hear nature alive all around him. He had been reborn. Just like that, a brand new world began, walking the city streets. His eyes drifted from the grand buildings to the wide crowd of demi-humans passing by. Back when he first arrived in the forest, a skeleton lay nearby with an oddly preserved backpack. Inside, he found clothes that fit him perfectly, a parting gift from the entity, designed to help him blend in. At last, he had arrived in the city. It looked exactly like what he would expect from a medieval fantasy setting, complete with horse-drawn carriages rolling down stone roads and sturdy rock houses. Various races walked side by side as a massive castle loomed high in the distance, following the gate guard's instructions. He eventually reached a busy intersection and looked up at the overhead signs. The foreign symbols were completely unfamiliar, made up of strange shapes in different sizes and orientations, clearly the alphabet of this world. He could not help but wish he could read. Even so, he kept going, doing his best to navigate by matching symbols and remembering the guard's instructions. After some trial and error, a large 3-story building appeared. 2 magnificent griffin statues stood proudly right at the entrance. In between them hung a heavy sign carved with those same unreadable characters. Surely the guild's name. The moment he stepped inside, the foyer opened into a towering space that stretched to the 2nd floor. A railed balcony wrapped around 3 sides, connecting upper rooms. And overlooking the crowd below, a grand staircase split the hall right down the middle, dividing the building into 2 completely distinct wings. To the right sat a bustling, lively tavern. Servers carried hot food and drinks, weaving through the rowdy crowd. But on the left, the atmosphere shifted entirely. A wall was covered. Postings, benches filled the center, leading up to a row of wooden reception counters. Diverse figures stood scattered around, robed mages, heavily armored knights and warriors carrying themselves with quiet danger. Any one of them would stand out instantly in his old world, but here they were just the norm. This was the Monster Hunting Guild. It really felt exactly like a fantasy game, and every single person inside looked ready for a deadly fight. That made it incredibly hard to tell who was the most dangerous. He walked deeper into the tavern area, scanning the room carefully. And then his eyes locked onto her. She sat in the back corner. Partially hidden from view, she was petite with a slim, athletic build. her figure perfectly balancing softness with lean muscle and a faint outline of abs. Her outfit was simple and flexible, a cropped tube top and fishnet sleeves. Loose pants completed the look. Her black hair was tied in a high ponytail. With angled bangs framing her face, she was attractive but clearly not fragile. Her pale skin and sharp, icy features reminded Leon of cold moonlight. Reflecting off steel, those vivid green eyes stood out against the contrast. Even without seeing any weapons, he could tell she was some kind of deadly assassin, or at least this world's equivalent. She looked closer to a tavern waitress than the hunters around her, but her presence felt dangerous. There was simply no doubt in Leon's mind, none at all. He walked straight over and sat down at her table before he spoke. She addressed him without even looking up. Her cold tone was completely dismissive. Asking what he wanted and calling him a farm boy, Leon instantly froze. He was caught off guard. He had always been on the introverted side. And approaching a stranger like this, especially a girl, wasn't something he was used to, so this was how it started. He couldn't exactly explain the reincarnation. Nor could he mention that death itself had sent him to this world. Instead, he introduced himself as Leon and awkwardly asked what made her think he was a farmer. Her answer was simple, she could just tell. That only confused him more. He asked how. She set her food down and looked directly into his eyes, keeping a stern, intensely sharp gaze. Then she explained her reasoning, calm, cutting, completely logical. His size suggested consistent food, but his muscles proved he did hard labor. His clothes were clean and well-kept, yet showed zero signs of wealth. And most importantly, the hesitant, uncertain way he had entered the building, looking around nervously until he picked her because she seemed less intimidating. It was a flawless breakdown, thorough, almost uncomfortably accurate. Talk about getting red, her analysis was sharp, and he realized he might have hit a nerve somewhere. Still, her logic made sense. In his old world, he was just average. Here, regular food was a massive privilege. And if she really was an assassin, reading people was second nature. At the very least, he could easily pass as a farmer's son. But lying felt wrong. The overseer's words echoed in his head, steadying him. Find the deadliest person. He took a breath and decided to be honest. He told her he was not from a farm, only visiting one. A few times, then, he explained the real reason he had approached her. It wasn't because he thought she was weak, far from it, actually. He had a gut feeling she was the deadliest person in the room. Leon saw a subtle shift in her reaction. She seemed pleased, even if she tried to hide it behind a hardened, probing stare. She asked if someone had set him up. Leon admitted that, yes. Someone had. He wanted to join the guild, but had no idea how anything worked. He was lost, broke, and could not even read. And as soon as he said those words, the reality really hit him. He felt the heavy weight of his own words, first interaction here, and he had already introduced himself as totally lost, broke, and clueless. Not exactly. Strong impression. Still, he pressed on anyway, determined to prove he wasn't joking. He told her he had been strictly instructed to find the absolute deadliest person there, and after looking around, he believed she was the one. She asked who had told him that, and he answered, a bit awkwardly, that it was death itself. For a brief moment, he braced himself. He fully expected things to go south. But instead, she leaned back, her expression softening into something more neutral, as if he had genuinely caught her interest. She explained that she had actually been trained to analyze people, and based on that, he was either foolish, unstable, or an exceptionally good liar. Still, she decided she would humor him and ask what he actually knew about hunters. A small victory. He just smiled and gathered his thoughts and admitted his understanding was pretty basic. Hunters took jobs to kill dangerous monsters, used powerful magic, and went on wild adventures. At least sometimes. Saying it aloud made him realize how little he actually knew. She followed up by asking if he knew his attributes or abilities. He admitted that he did not, and he wasn't even sure what those things really were. That earned a small smirk from her. She clearly found this amusing. She leaned forward slightly, clearly far more engaged now. She told him he really was just as inexperienced as he seemed, and explained that this guild used something called crystalline dice to measure attributes. There was a fee to use them, and if his total was high enough, he would join, no problem. After that, he would need to pay both the sign-up fee and the first year's membership fee. He asked if that process was handled on the other side of the massive building, and she confirmed it. Then, since he couldn't read, she offered to point him to the right desk. She also pointed out that he had absolutely no money, though she could cover the cost for him, meaning he would owe her a favor in return. Her tone shifted when she said that, carrying a hint of something playful, but also unmistakably dangerous. It felt almost like she enjoyed the idea of having leverage. Even as it served as a quiet warning, he secretly wondered if this actually counted as flirting, and let's be real, who wouldn't wonder? But this felt far more dangerous. Light-hearted, she was reading him completely, and he didn't really have anything to bargain with. Still, he had already decided to be straightforward with her, so there was no point in backing out now. He told her that was fine with him. For a brief moment, surprise crossed her face before her expression returned to neutral. She commented that he was unusual and admitted she didn't normally go out of her way to help random people, but she would make an exception this time. With that, she stood up and started walking toward the left wing of the building, and he followed. As they moved, he realized there was one thing he hadn't asked yet, so he mentioned he hadn't got her name. She answered simply, Rika. He quickly followed Rika into the left wing of the massive guild hall, where a receptionist stood behind one of the counters. Rika spoke first, explaining that he was there to have his personal attributes and unique abilities checked, and that she would be covering the cost while observing. The receptionist acknowledged it and gestured for them to follow. They were led into a back hallway. Behind one of the doors lay a private room. A massive table sat right in the center. Bookcases lined the walls, packed with boxes that the receptionist immediately opened. She pulled out several colorful dice. Some were round, others sharp. 3 of them had 8 sides, and 12 had 12 sides. Each had a unique, vibrant color. Rika explained they were crystalline dice. The 3 diamond-shaped ones were for core attributes. Those represented mana, kai, and essence, while the other 12 tracked basic, easily trainable abilities. He asked about the attributes, struggling to follow along. The absolute difference between mana, kai, and essence was a massive concept for him to grasp. Kai was energy drawn directly from the body. She specialized in using it. Mana and essence were similar, but she did not possess those attributes herself. Because of that, she did not go into detail about their workings. She only mentioned that mana comes from the mind and essence from the soul. That sparked another question. He asked if having multiple attributes was even possible. She confirmed it was. It would heavily influence his future fighting style. Depending on which ones he possessed, his future combat path would be entirely decided. Abilities mattered, but they were trainable. Attributes, far more foundational. Improvement was possible, but only if he did not have 0. 0, that single word lingered in his head. It felt heavy. He asked if a 0 score was common. She smirked, clearly enjoying his growing panic. She effortlessly read his terrified reaction. She loved watching him squirm. It was actually incredibly common, she said, handing him all 15 dice. So having no attributes whatsoever was a real possibility. He swallowed hard. Talk about a massive blow to his confidence. He was completely average. He prayed for something, anything, just a single spark of latent potential. Moment of truth. He rolled the dice across the long table. They bounced, clattered, and glowed in distinct colors before finally settling. His fate was decided. He focused on the 3 8-sided dice first. The blue one landed on 0. The red was also 0. The green, another 0. Complete and total silence. His heart utterly sank as he stared at the empty results. He had 0 attributes. The overseer promised him a chance, but what kind of chance did he actually have with absolutely nothing? Rika suddenly burst out laughing. She told him not to look so completely defeated just yet. She pointed him toward another die. She and the receptionist were staring at it intensely. It was a gold-colored die, and it had landed on a solid 12. That was the absolute maximum possible value. It instantly grabbed his attention. If it was the highest possible roll, it had to mean something. He asked what ability it was. Instead of answering, Rika poked his chest. She explained that the golden die represented his vitality. Everything else was completely average, but he would make an excellent punching bag. Then she casually asked to stab him to test it. Talk about extreme. He blinked in sheer confusion, utterly speechless at her absurd suggestion. Thankfully, the receptionist stepped in and cleared her throat to restore order. She read his results officially: 0 in all attributes, average in all abilities. His only exceptions were slightly above average intelligence and that unconfirmed vitality. She excused herself to fetch a larger die. What was coming next? As they wait, Rika turns to Leon, completely puzzled. she questions how his intelligence had reached 8, especially considering that he couldn't read. He admits that he was once a student in his past life. What surprises her, he quickly changes the subject to ask about that punching bag comment and why the receptionist needed another die. Rika explains that normal human abilities typically range from 1 to 10, and even though attributes can temporarily boost them in battle, 10 is the absolute natural limit. Break that cap and you are a legendary hero. Hearing this, Leon pauses, immediately asking if that actually makes him a hero. She dismisses the notion instantly, explaining that real heroes usually have most of their stats above 10. In contrast, Leon has absolutely 0 attributes and average stats. When everything is tallied up, he is still about 20 points short of qualifying for the guild. To cover that massive gap, his vitality would need to hit 32, which she compares to something on the level of actual legendary dragons, prompting him to ask what exactly it is vitality even represents. After all, the idea of a legendary dragon having only 6 times a human's vitality just doesn't make sense. She clarifies that the scale is not linear. The gap between each level widens as the value rises, meaning the difference between 5 and 6 is much far smaller than between 6 and 7. As for what vitality itself means, she describes it as general health, recovery, stamina, and resistance to illness. So essentially, Leon is just a normal guy with an insanely large health pool. The overseer did mention he spent way too long in limbo, which likely explains why this is his single major strength in life. Just then, the receptionist returns carrying a tray, and right at its center sits a golden 20-sided die, telling him to roll whenever he is ready to proceed. Talk about a massive moment of truth. He absolutely needs a perfect 20 to rank up. In gaming terms, plenty of characters use their health as a main resource instead of mana. If he can just get into this guild, maybe he can find a way to do the same. He picks up the die and rolls it. It rolls just like the others, but the light it emits is far brighter, almost blinding. When it finally comes to a halt and that intense glow fades, he leans far forward. A perfect 20, there is still a chance, but before he can even celebrate, something sharp presses straight into his side, nearly throwing him completely off balance. He turns to find Rika leaning heavily in close, pressing an 8-inch metal spike right against his body. He reacts instantly, demanding to know what on earth she thinks she is doing. She steps back casually, twirling the spike between her fingers, and explains that something very strange is happening. She can easily pierce his skin, but at the same time, his body is actively forcing her weapon right back out, as if pushing it away. Since he lacks Kai, he shouldn't even be able to use any active regeneration skills. Even so, he firmly warns her not to casually test things like that on him. She simply smiles, reminding him that she did ask earlier, adding that she was just curious. From her perspective, having such insane vitality with average stats is unusual. She mentions that while she can easily push him off balance physically, she could not seriously hurt him, only proving her earlier point. He really was just a punching bag. Suddenly, the receptionist cleared her throat. She drew their attention, explaining she had to inform the guild master. She had to report his results, and he would likely arrive that afternoon. He would continue the test then, so she asked him to wait nearby. She led them out of the testing room and back into the main foyer. She gave a polite bow and left, while Rika turned back to look at him. She admitted she was curious about his results, and he had far exceeded her expectations. Not bad for someone she had initially written off as just a farm boy. He asked if she was leaving, and she confirmed she had to go. Her party had a massive raid scheduled for that night, so she had to prepare. She had only come to the guild to grab some supplies and eat lunch. Before leaving, she warned him to be careful and not trust others so easily. She told him to share his results when she returned, offering one last smile. He sat down on a bench in the main wing and watched her walk away. Taking a moment to reflect, he realized Rika carried an undeniably dangerous vibe. And yet, once he got her talking, she was surprisingly easy to get along with. Her testing his durability could have ended badly, but it did not feel malicious. For his very first friend in this strange new world, he could do much worse. Plus, if he was being completely honest, she was also incredibly good-looking. He could not help but thank the Overseer of Death for this setup. By the time he got back to the main hall, lunchtime had arrived. Hours had passed since his test, and the morning crowd had completely cleared out. Now a completely different wave of hunters was starting to filter back in. During that quiet midday lull, a polite receptionist stepped forward and called for him. She thanked him for waiting so patiently and asked him to follow her. He followed her down the back corridor, passing the room where he rolled earlier. They walked all the way to the very end of the quiet corridor. She knocked softly on the door, opened it, and gestured for him to enter. Inside was the grand office of the guild master, dominated by a massive desk. Heavy bookshelves lined the walls, and wide windows stretched across the far side. They let in a soft, steady light, highlighting the old man sitting behind the desk. He was completely bald, sporting a long white beard that reached his chest. His lined face showed his age, but his sharp, calm eyes carried quiet authority. He wore simple, faded gray robes that looked more suited for a monastery. Despite his old age, his body looked incredibly disciplined from years of training. He looked like an old monk who was now serving as the guild master. He did not radiate the same direct danger as Rika, but still felt intense. A steady, grounded presence surrounded him. The young man politely introduced himself. He explained he was here because he rolled a 20 on the gold die. Nadu invited him to sit, introducing himself as the master of the guild. His voice was calm and deliberate, each word measured without any rush. Nadu mentioned he had already heard quite a bit about the new arrival. He listed off details, making it clear that word had traveled incredibly fast. A newcomer from the countryside, first time in a city, and completely lacking attributes. His stats were average, but his vitality reached a hero's level, Nadu even mentioned. How the boy befriended Rika and got her to pay his fees, which surprised him. Even more than those bizarre test results, the kid admitted he had no idea she had that kind of reputation, explaining he only approached her simply because. She seemed strong, Nadu agreed, explaining that Rika actually belonged to one of the guild's top 5 parties, an all-female group called Rose Thorns. And that she absolutely despised men, that was the real shocker. It made the boy's situation highly unusual. Soon, Nadu shifted back to his abilities. Nadu explained that having a single stat above 20 was rare, but when it did happen, it rarely led to anything remarkable. People like that often became regular citizens excelling in specific fields, like smart scholars or charismatic performers. They lived totally normal lives. But high vitality, while useful, was not tied to any job. The boy asked what he meant. He had not come all this way just to hear his main stat was completely useless. Nadu agreed there was more. But first he had to verify that high vitality. Only then could they discuss what the boy could actually do. Nadu reached under his desk, pulling out a strange, cylindrical die. Its ends were shaped like pyramids, while the sides formed triangles and diamonds, a flawless piece of craftsmanship even for a world already filled with magic. Nadu explained that this was a special die, one that could only be rolled once. When thrown, it would split in two, showing the tens and ones places. Nadu told him to roll when ready. It came down to this once more, just one roll to decide everything. He needed a 32 to qualify, literally dragon-level health. Talk about pressure. No pressure, he rolled. The second it hit the table, it cracked open, splitting into 2 pieces that suddenly exploded with blinding light. Unlike the earlier dice, this was on an entirely different level. He instinctively raised his arms to shield his face as the flash flooded the room. After a moment, the glare faded. He blinked away the haze and leaned in to check the result. 0-0, complete silence in the room. He froze, staring at it. This made absolutely no sense. Shouldn't he have gotten at least 20? Was 20 just the baseline? Did a 1 mean 21? His thoughts spiraled until Nadu spoke, whispering that it was an actual 100. That snapped him right out of his daze. He stared at Nadu, trying to confirm the words. The examiner explained that although it was technically undetermined, there likely wasn't a die big enough to measure past this. He knew nothing existed within stat reaching 100, so those zeros meant 100, he felt. Amazing for a second, but Nadu's tone instantly shifted, growing heavy. He warned the kid that this was actually very bad. Monsters fed on human vitality, vampires, liches, banshees, and worse. To them, our protagonist would be a walking feast of immense power, and with everything else about him being completely average, he could never protect himself. He would be easy prey. Nadu added that there were already reports of vampire and succubus attacks inside the city. Then he stands up, his gaze Sharpening, he admits that, honestly, eliminating him right now would be the safest option before something worse finds him, but he stops him immediately, pointing out how he keeps asking about turning his crazy vitality into raw power. If monsters can do it, there must be a way for him. 2, at least that gives him a real shot at protecting himself. The leader pauses, then admits he is not going to act on that dark thought, not just because he is unsure if he even can, given how absurd his life force is, but because he must accept the application. Technically, he meets the requirements to join the guild. Still, he makes it clear he is not pleased. After a tense moment, he sits back down, confirming that it is indeed possible to convert life force into power, but explains those dark methods are usually known only to people practicing the dark arts. Even then, those mages usually drain life from others rather than using their own. If he wants to learn, he will have to hunt down someone like that, a risky move, since they might see him as a juicy resource rather than a person. That makes perfect sense, even if he hates it. As things stand, he is more useful to bloodthirsty monsters than to himself, so he asks what comes next. The man tells him pretty reluctantly that he is now officially a hunter. He can return tomorrow to grab his guild card, starting at the absolute lowest rank, tier 5. The rest of the details will wait until then. More importantly, he warns the kid to keep his situation a total secret, for his own safety and everyone else's. He promises to quietly reach out to some of the shadier hunters in the guild to see if any of them have any knowledge that could help him manage his unique condition. He accepts that, so this is it. He is officially a hunter now. Despite the pretty intense welcome, he finds himself looking forward to what comes next. A quiet excitement is building inside his chest. So much has happened in one day, but for once things feel finally real. His new life has begun. Standing alone in the city square beside the guild, he watches the sun slowly dip below the horizon. He has nowhere to stay, and since arriving in this world, he hasn't eaten or slept once. Tonight, and likely for a few more nights, he will sleep on the streets. He can eat if he wants to, but there is no real night. The same goes for sleep. That raises a pretty unsettling question in his mind. Does he not need them anymore? And if that is true, can he actually starve to death? Think about that. He starts pacing back and forth, trying to make sense of his situation. How much can he actually heal through? Rika said he has no real regeneration skills, but when she tested him with that needle, his body pushed it right out on its own through healing. That suggests something deeper, maybe basic human healing scales with his vitality, which would explain everything. But then that brings him right back to his original question. Can he outheal starvation? It should be impossible. Food is a resource his body absolutely needs to function, and yet he feels no hunger at all. He glances around the square. People are heading home, mostly humans, with the occasional demi-human mixed in. The city is settling into night. He ends up speaking his thoughts. He spoke out loud, mostly to organize his messy thoughts. He decided he should still eat and sleep whenever possible. Even if he did not need it, he did not want to lose his humanity. For now, he would rely on his sheer vitality until he found a way to properly establish himself. With that settled, he started walking through the city streets, partly to pass time and partly to find somewhere to rest, a bench, a quiet corner, anything to get him through the night. He was not planning on sleeping, but resting still felt worthwhile. As he moved through the streets, he made a habit of returning to the guild square every so often, using it as a landmark since he could not read the local signs. Honestly, a pretty smart move. Otherwise, he might have missed the shadow stalking him. They were completely cloaked in black, hood pulled low, with zero features visible at all. By the 7th time he circled back through a small square, he had already accepted that he was being followed. He wondered what they thought of him at this point. He clearly was not going anywhere, but he was not trying to shake them either. He briefly considered just stopping out in the open and confronting it. Then a loud thud broke his train of thought. He turned immediately, ready for a fight, only to see the cloaked figure lying face down on the ground behind him. He paused. He could have walked away, just kept moving and pretended he hadn't seen a thing. Nobody would have known, but instead he found himself lifting them and dragging them into a nearby alley off the main road. He propped them up against a wall and pulled back the hood. What he found was a girl. Her skin was pale and smooth, her face delicate and unblemished. Her dark red hair was long and jagged, spiking outward like barbed wire. Her figure was striking, with a narrow waist and a balanced full silhouette that stood out even beneath. Her clothing, she wore a short black dress in a Victorian style, elegant yet rebellious, decorated with chains and leather straps, thigh-high boots. Choker and multiple ear piercings completed the look, blending Gothic refinement with something more defiant. She did not look like she was from around here, though she appeared human at first glance. That shade of red hair did not seem natural. Then again, he had already seen enough variety in this world to know that appearances could be deceiving. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her stomach growling. That immediately reminded him of what Nadia had said about recent vampire attacks. Could she be one? The pale skin, the red hair, it fit. Maybe she had passed out from hunger. Maybe she had been unable to find anyone to feed on. Or maybe he was overthinking it. Curiosity got the better of him. He crouched down and gently touched her face, then carefully parted her lips with his thumb. That was when he saw them. 4 fangs where her canines should have been, long, sharp, and slightly curved inward, not just for piercing but for holding. Strangely enough, they looked almost delicate in their own dangerous way. He leaned in a little closer to examine them, even though he was fully aware of how questionable the situation looked. Then his finger lingered too long. A small cut and a drop of blood fell onto her tongue. He reacted instantly, but before he could pull away, her hands shot up and grabbed his arm. She was smaller than him, her fingers unable to fully wrap around his forearm, yet her grip held him in place. Her amber eyes flutter open. Immediately, she begins to feed. Those movements are slow at first, almost instinctive as she draws blood. There is a strange, wild intensity here, a deep focus showing that she is totally absorbed. His thoughts spiral. Why is she reacting like this? Her body shifts, breathing unevenly as she drinks on, and the whole situation feels way more intimate than he ever expected. He cannot make sense of it. Is this feeding or something else? His mind struggles to process this, and his body freezes up. The intense closeness, the unfamiliar feeling, it is completely overwhelming. He has never experienced this. He must steady his mind. This is dangerous. He has to focus. Time drags on for nearly 2 minutes before the bleeding finally stops. Now, a massive question arises. Did his wound heal? Why did it take so long? Does her saliva interfere with healing? Without his high vitality, how bad would this have been? Slowly, her movements fade. She draws back slightly, licking away the final drops of blood before releasing him. She lets out a soft, embarrassed sigh, then her eyes sharpen. Reality hits her all at once. She jerks upright, pressing herself against the wall as her grip loosens completely. She stares in total disbelief, clearly shaken by what just happened, struggling to accept that she actually fed on a human, and that he is still standing right there. He offers a small, awkward wave. She stares blankly, then looks down at his marked finger, still showing signs of the bite. Instantly, her face flushes red. She starts panicking, trying to explain that she was just incredibly hungry, that it had been way too long, that she was starving. He listens, trying to make sense of her words. A vampire who does not normally target humans is extremely rare, but more importantly, vampires use blood as power, meaning this is a massive opportunity. He interrupts gently, acknowledging what she is, before asking if she can teach him forbidden blood magic. Everything stops. Her entire expression shifts. Instantly, her eyes narrowing as she glares at him. The room goes cold and a dagger of fluid, dark blood solidifies in her hand. He realizes immediately that he pushed too fast. She is shocked he even survived, plus that saliva trick means her feedings usually end in death, and he just asked for lessons. He quickly tells her to wait and let him explain, but she is already rising, keeping the dagger pointed at him. He points out she just drank his blood and he could have died, so she owes him fair hearing. She counters immediately, arguing that he was the one who stuck his finger in her mouth, so any danger was his own fault. Honestly, that is fair. Still, he explains that he was never going to die, and since she collapsed after following him, he actually helped her. That makes them even. She hesitates, and he can see her weighing the facts. She was starving, yet he gave blood and survived. Finally, she agrees to at least hear him out. She made it quite clear that she owed him absolutely nothing. Leon released a quiet breath of relief as the tension finally eased. Then he explained his plan. Spilling innocent blood was out of the question. If she taught him, drawing from his own veins was his plan, so she could keep feeding. Her guarded expression shifted to pure confusion. That was real progress. Leon introduced himself properly to break the ice. After a short silence, she gave her name, Valeria. He quickly explained his bizarre situation as clearly as possible, avoiding any pointless details. He simply told her that he wanted to become a hunter despite having zero affinity for Kai, magic, or essence. All he really possessed was an absolutely massive pool of vitality, so if she taught him to use that raw power for blood magic, it would solve everything. Leon was excited as he said it, but Valeria just stared at him completely stunned, questioning how he could be so calm about everything. He did not immediately understand her, so he asked for clarification. That only frustrated her further as she pointed out the obvious. He was casually talking to a literal vampire who had just fed on nothing. Instead of showing fear or caution, he acted like it was completely normal. Honestly, to Leon, this whole encounter felt straight out of a story. Standing a bit taller, he raised his hands with theatrical flair. Dramatic flair while describing it. A beautiful vampire, starving because she refused to harm humans, finally reaches her limit, only to meet someone she could feed from without causing any harm. Then he dropped the theatrics, still smiling as he returned to a more grounded tone. Speaking practically, it worked out perfectly. She could feed without guilt, and he could learn blood magic. It was a fair trade. Valeria called him unreasonable, clearly unsure how to process him at all. Even so, he could see hesitation in her expression, mixed with something else. The fact that she could feed safely from him, and that she had already experienced it, clearly affected her. She needed time to think and asked him to tell her more about himself. That caught him off guard for a moment, but he did not mind. Honestly, he found her extreme caution pretty endearing, even though she was more than capable of overpowering him if she wanted. Leon sat down against the wall, settling into a more relaxed posture. Starting with the basics, he explained that he had arrived in the city that very morning. Having no money, he spent the night walking in circles. Valeria quietly sat down as well, keeping a small distance while she listened intently. Leon kept talking, mentioning his recent visit to the Hunter Guild. He explained that he had technically passed the exam, officially making him a hunter. But with absolutely zero attributes, he was basically just an ordinary human. She picked up on that instantly, connecting it to his vitality. She realized his massive life force must have carried him through. She seemed quite surprised that there was no strict requirement for any magic attributes. He admitted it surprised him too, but apparently the guild allowed it. And as she could see, his high vitality kept him breathing. Even after she had fed on him, she observed he was unusually energetic and asked. She noted that he seemed unusually energetic and asked what had just happened. She asks if he feels tired at all, and he honestly tells her no. Next, she breaks down his exact situation. Since he has absolutely no attributes, his only real path forward is learning blood arts, using his own vitality as a primary resource. He repeats the words quietly to himself, letting them sink in. Then he admits that he was not originally thinking of vampires when choosing this path. Actually, the guildmaster warned him to stay far away from creatures like her, since they easily use his life force for their own gain. She points out with a dry smile that he still followed her into the dark of night anyway. He nods, agreeing that she is now completely caught up. After a short silence, she pivots, asking about his life before today. That poses a major problem. He cannot simply reveal he is from another world, especially since she is already so hesitant to trust him, so he plays it safe, sharing simple, completely ordinary facts about his daily life. His favorite color, his preferred foods, but even as he speaks, he knows. Honestly, trying to small talk a deadly vampire is a bold strategy and incredibly awkward. It feels like a forced school introduction. She tilts her head, clearly unimpressed, and notes that she meant something else. He admits that he simply does not know how to respond, asking if there is something more specific she wants to hear. She explains that she is not looking for a thrilling story, but rather wants to understand exactly who she is dealing with. She adds that she is not welcome anywhere and has not had a friendly conversation in ages. That changes the vibe entirely. He exhales softly, realizing he has been taking this meeting way too lightly. He acknowledges her caution, though at the same time he finds it weird how little fear he is showing himself. The guildmaster warned him that he is basically premium bait for monsters, and yet here he is, talking confidently in an incredibly dangerous situation. This is not like him at all. Back then he was quiet, incredibly reserved, and went out of his way to avoid standing out. He hesitates, thinking it over before speaking. He shares that he recently came incredibly close to death. Now he is alone in a strange world with absolutely nothing holding him back. No family, no home, no place to return to. Because of that, something shifted. He feels lighter, less afraid, not completely fearless, but different enough that he is still trying to wrap his head around it. She listens, and something in his words strikes a deep chord with her. She observes that his life seems just as rough as hers, maybe even worse, yet he is taking it remarkably well. He worries for a second if his attitude rubbed her the wrong way, but before he can speak, she mutters something softly, a fateful encounter. Then she sits up straight, her expression hardening with resolve. Accepting the deal, she outlines the terms clearly and formally. He will serve as her food source, and she will teach him blood arts. That is exactly what he wanted. He stands up immediately, unable to hide his pure excitement, asking when they can start and what he needs to do. She instantly tells him to cool it, reminding him that this is not something to shout out loud. If anyone finds out, he is dead. Being targeted before he could even establish himself, Valeria spoke, and he noticed movement at the very edges of the alleyway. Two cloaked figures appeared, one at each end blocking their path. No escape, Leon commented. On the terrible timing, Valeria stood up beside him, shifting defensive stances as she formed the same crimson dagger in her hand, clarifying that they weren't after Leon but after her. These were assassins tracking her. As he watched, blood began to flow from their hands, rising into the air and shaping itself into weapons. The liquid twisted, condensing into thin, elegant blades, rapiers made entirely of crimson with fluid, moving handles that continued to move like living streams. So these were the ones behind the recent attacks. Valeria had been starving and running. Meanwhile, they had been feeding freely. Leon raised his fists instinctively, settling into a stance as he prepared. Time for lesson 1, but Valeria quickly shut the idea down immediately, saying there would be no lesson, not here, not now, and that he was still just human. While she couldn't take them both, they needed to escape. Leon stood back to back with her as the vampire assassins closed in, each cloaked in dark robes and wielding a crimson rapier formed from their own blood. Leon pointed out that escape wasn't exactly simple when both exits were blocked. Even as he spoke, he kept observing Valeria's dagger. It was made of solidified blood, but theirs was different. The handles still flowed like liquid. That suggested a more advanced technique, or maybe just greater supply of blood to manipulate. Either way, he didn't have enough information to fully understand it. Leon forced himself to focus. No choice. They had to break through. He asked her if she had any mobility options, wall running, flight, anything, but she admitted she didn't have enough blood left, and with him there, the situation was worse. Her voice carried a hint of panic. Not good. Before Leon could respond, the assassins attacked. They thrust their rapiers even from a distance, and as they did, the blades extended, more hardened blood forming along the weapon, increasing both reach and speed. Leon reacted instantly, warning her and shoving her aside. The attack struck him instead. Both blades pierced his flesh, only a few inches. Then they bent and shattered, fragments of crimson scattered outward, still carrying the force of the impact. They hadn't realized what had just happened. His healing had limited the depth of the wounds, and because the attacks came from opposite directions, their momentum had canceled out, causing the blades to break apart violently. Leon saw his chance. Right then, he grabbed Valeria's hand and ran, pulling her toward the city square. Behind them, the vampires were already reforming their weapons. As he moved, a thought clicked into place. They didn't feel like true assassins, more like hired killers. He shifted direction slightly and charged straight toward the one blocking their path, placing himself between the assassin and Valeria as he thrust again. This time, the blade lodged straight into his chest. Right on cue, the second attack came from behind. Without turning, Leon pulled Valeria in front of him and held her close, bracing himself as a second strike hit his back. It was stronger than the first, but still not enough to fully overcome his quick healing. With nothing countering, the impact sends both of them tumbling right out of the alley and into the open square. He hits the stone floor hard but recovers instantly, pushing himself back onto his feet. He pulls Valeria up, mentioning he already suspected their attackers were far from professional. He asks if she has a bounty on her head, but she immediately sidesteps the question. She asks instead what makes him think they are not real assassins. Her silence is answer enough. He lets it drop. Real professional killers would have dropped from above or used shadows to strike. Instead, these guys just blocked exits and relied on a direct, loud confrontation. It works but lacks subtlety. Since their target survived once, they are getting desperate. They will likely reuse that same long-range thrust. Right on cue, the enemies appear. They step from the darkness, calmly reforming their weapons with cold smiles. One even licks the bloody steel. He mocks how ridiculously dramatic that is. At the same time, he realizes they probably know he can heal from wounds. Vampires have anti-healing properties in their saliva, which makes his recovery abnormal. He keeps analyzing, will they stick to that same signature extended attack? It gives them a crazy reach, but it probably consumes their own blood to sustain. Out here in the open, they have room to dodge, but the enemy still has a reach advantage. He glances back, pointing out the Hunter's Guild is just a short distance away. It doubles as an inn, but Valeria shuts down the idea immediately. As a vampire, those hunters would kill her on sight. The assassins creep forward. They pace themselves carefully, closing in but not completely surrounding them just yet. Retreating back into the tight alleys would shut down those long-range thrusts. But hitting a dead end means game over. They are completely out of safe options. Talk about a worst-case scenario. He begins to speak, and then disaster strikes. A sudden, brutal impact shakes the air. Time slows. He hesitated too long. That extended blade drives straight through his chest, piercing his heart and his back. Without his healing magic reacting in time, he feels the sheer, raw force of it. Instinct takes over. He grabs the bloody steel, squeezing with all his might. But the blade refuses to shatter. A dark, terrifying thought crosses his mind. Is this it? Can he actually be taken down in one strike? Valeria is desperately holding on to him, screaming something, but he cannot hear a thing. The only sound left is his own heartbeat, and it is not slowing down, it is accelerating. Every single pulse strikes like a piston, forceful, relentless, and loud. Power drives through him, heavy vibrations rattle the blade. The sword rings like metal clashing on metal. He refuses to die here. No more doubt, no more hesitation. He lacks the physical power to break it. But he possesses something far greater, sheer vitality. He lets go and clenches his fists. He pulls his arms back, tightening every single muscle before unleashing a massive burst. His chest flexes and the metal blade shatters, the cracks racing down the weapon. It explodes in a chain reaction. His recovery magic surges hard, focused right at his core. It completely overpowers the vampire venom, though the outer wound continues to bleed heavily. He steadies himself, locking eyes with the assassins as pure adrenaline floods his veins. This is not over. He steps forward, fists clenched and ready. He demands to know in a sharp voice if that was honestly their best shot. That felt absolutely incredible. Maybe it is just the rush, but he feels completely unstoppable. He felt unstoppable. Valeria refused to head toward the Hunter's Guild, so running around blindly was not going to help. Only one option remained. A direct fight. He told her they were targets, promising to take them head-on. She focused on long-range attacks. Honestly, she was still deeply shaken from what had just unfolded. He had survived a blow that absolutely should have ended him, and then shattered a solid blood blade like glass. Her eyes were still teary. But she forced herself to focus. She explained that these vampires did not typically use ranged attacks because the blood cost was simply too high. He promised to replenish her supply later, urging her to unleash everything she had. Then he lunged forward, sprinting straight toward the two vampires as they charged back in response. Valeria tried to shout a warning, but it was far too late for second thoughts. They were insanely fast, closing the gap. Nearly instantly, the brute whose weapon he broke earlier took the lead, charging with clenched fists before launching a brutal high kick at his head. The boy raised his guard barely in time, but the raw power shattered his defense. Without missing a beat, the vampire spun, driving a second heavy kick right into his stomach, sending him crashing down. Before he could even recover, the second beast followed up instantly, leaping over the first and driving a rapier down in a lethal thrust that pierced straight through his heart, yet he reacted without fear. Ignoring the sharp agony, as he flexed his chest muscles to shatter the steel from the inside, without wasting a single second, he grabbed a broken shard and jammed it deep into the enemy forearm, and believe me, Valeria was not about to stand by. She pointed her hand skyward as blood surged upward along her arm, completely defying gravity. Dozens of droplets clustered above her, floating there like glowing red stars. Then She triggered the final step. Those floating drops hardened into razor-sharp spikes. Before raining down in a devastating, rapid barrage, they pelted the earth in a massive wave, tearing right through both vampires as they desperately tried to escape. Our main character was still pinned down, caught in the crossfire. Instinct had forced him to shield his face, but his entire body was now riddled with spikes. Talk about a painful plan. Danger close, Valeria collapsed instantly, having poured everything she had into that massive strike. Now the rest was up to him, but things looked grim. The two vampires were already starting to regenerate, though the strain was clearly showing. Their cellular healing was wildly wasteful, but undeniably effective. He knew he had to end this fast. He pushed himself up, charging the nearest standing vampire. He threw out a move name before he could even think of anything better. Porcupine hug. It sounded incredibly dumb, but it worked, still covered in those bloody spikes. He grabbed the beast and squeezed him tight, between his crushing grip and his own flesh pushing the needles out. The spikes drove deeper into the target. The vampire screamed in agony, shoving him away while trying to force his blood to clot. But the effort failed. He ran out of stamina, collapsing as blood loss took over. That left only one opponent. He quickly analyzed the battlefield. If the survivor fed on him, game over. If he kidnapped Valeria and fled, game over. But forcing a swift retreat or securing a kill meant victory, locking eyes with his remaining enemy. He warned him plainly that he was completely outmatched and should run while he still could. Bluffing was his absolute best play here. If the vampire backed down, they survived. He wanted to help Valeria recover and prepare for whatever came next. It seemed the enemy might actually consider leaving, but then resolve filled his eyes. He was staying. He charged again, slower but still faster than our hero. The beast opened with a vicious left hook. The boy raised his arms to block. But once again, the sheer difference in physical strength shattered his guard completely. A right uppercut followed, then two quick, brutal strikes straight to his nose. The impact stung, but his supernatural healing mended the wounds almost instantly. The pain was real, but it did not matter. He stopped blocking entirely. Every heavy blow cost the vampire blood. This was a battle of endurance. Our guy would not lose. He focused on one crucial threat instead. The beast would eventually try to bite him, the one attack he had to avoid. The relentless barrage continued with punches and kicks, but he stood firm now. He locked eyes with the monster, steady, unshaken, and somehow even smiling. He stood like a wall between the beast and Valeria, waiting for his opening. The beast faked a left, then drove an elbow straight into his stomach. It was the perfect setup to reach his neck, but watch this move. He struck first. A clean, heavy uppercut snapped the creature's jaw shut. The wounded vampire retreated, gasping for air. It looked like he might finally run. But then a short blade suddenly pierced straight through his heart from behind. Dark blood burst outward. The weapon looked exactly like a traditional Japanese wakizashi. The pure force of the stab sent a sharp gust of wind whistling through. The dying beast tried to swing backward in a desperate attempt to retaliate. But his attacker was already gone. It was Rika, balancing effortlessly on her blade. She pivoted smoothly, avoiding his wild swing with total, cold-blooded precision. As the monster collapsed, she began explaining the mechanics of vampire biology. They store their lifeblood inside their hearts, healing from almost any other wound. He noticed right away that Rika herself was not in the best shape. Her breathing was slightly heavy, her skin covered in fresh cuts and bruises. She had clearly just survived a brutal fight of her own somewhere nearby. Yet she calmly kept talking about the best way to drain their blood. Destroying the heart was the key to taking down these nocturnal predators. He called out to her, deeply relieved to see his ally alive and well. She greeted him with her usual nickname, Farm Boy, looking surprisingly impressed. Surviving against 3 vampires on his own was no small feat. Wait 3, before he could process that, she walked toward Valeria. Rika was going to execute her, declaring it too risky to leave any alive. He immediately stepped in, blocking her path and saying Valeria was his friend. In a split second, Rika's relaxed mood completely vanished. Her eyes went cold. Her voice sharp with sudden fury, she demanded to know what he was thinking. She had warned him before about trusting strangers, and now he was protecting monsters. He stammered out an explanation, insisting that Valeria was completely different. She was a vegan vampire. That absurd claim only made Rika even angrier. To a battle-hardened hunter, the idea was the most ridiculous thing she had ever heard. He had to admit it sounded crazy, but he truly believed she was telling the truth. Rika snapped back, reminding him that these beasts exist solely to feed on humans. Deception would be second nature to them. To Rika, Valeria was not just dangerous, she was a monster that only looked human. He simply responded, without thinking too much, pointing out that Rika herself had killed people, yet he still trusted her. That caught her completely off guard. She froze, a faint shift in her expression, showing a hint of color rising to her cheeks. She dismissed it quickly, though, arguing that this was different. He trusted her for who she was, but she warned him not to trust anyone so easily, even her. He understood, but he did not back down. He told her he felt that same presence from Valeria as he did from Rika. That was enough to trust his gut. He also explained that Valeria had already agreed to teach him blood arts, and in exchange he would feed her. She genuinely seemed to dislike harming humans, which was why she described herself that way. Rika paused, then asked if he had already fed her. He confirmed it, and her expression shifted once again, this time to complete disbelief. He said he would wake Valeria up so she could judge her properly. Then she asked if he had passed the hunter exam. Her tone softened completely now, carrying something almost apologetic. He told her that he had, and that he was officially a hunter now. With that settled, he walked over to Valeria, who was still unconscious. He knew he had to feed her, but Rika was watching. He hesitated for a second, hoping it would not be like before. He knelt down and carefully placed his finger in Valeria's mouth. Again, her fangs pierced his skin, and as blood flowed, she reacted immediately, wrapping her hands around his forearm to feed with intense hunger. With that same terrifying intensity, her movements were purely instinctive, her body responding in ways that made the moment feel far too personal. He could feel Rika's sharp, unrelenting gaze burning into his back. She asked if this was why he trusted her, her tone laced with irritation, rather than pure anger, as if holding back. After what felt like a long stretch of time, Valeria finally opened her eyes and looked up at him, her soft, unfocused expression whispering that he had won. Her hand still held his arm, but now her grip was gentle, almost tender. That moment did not last. Talk about a rude awakening. Rika lunged instantly, striking him hard enough to send him flying away from Valeria. Before he could recover, she stood between them, pointing her sharp blade directly at Valeria. She demanded to know her identity. He tried to introduce them properly, but Rika ignored him completely, keeping her eyes locked on Valeria. Valeria, to her credit, remained composed, agreeing to go along with it since she recognized Rika was someone he trusted, introducing herself simply as Valeria. Rika pressed harder, demanding her full name. Valeria refused, explaining she had abandoned her family and abandoned that name entirely. That only made Rika even more aggressive. She demanded to know how much blood Valeria took, what would happen if she had not stopped, and if she could even stop, or if she was actually unconscious at all. It was a relentless interrogation. He thought about stepping in, but before he could say a word, Rika cuts him off, pointing out that if he really trusts Valeria, he should let her speak. After all, if there is nothing to hide, there should not be a problem. Facing the intense pressure, Valeria answers honestly, admitting she has no idea how much blood she took while unconscious, since he felt like an endless source. If she had not stopped, she has no clue what would have happened. Vampires do not naturally stop. They feed until interrupted or until nothing remains. The only reason she pulled away was because his wound healed. Her voice remains chillingly steady, even though these words are clearly hard to say. But Rika does not ease up, immediately firing off even more relentless questions about her behavior, her true intentions, and why she even came to this city. Valeria pushes back slightly, denying that she is trying to manipulate him, explaining that his blood simply tasted far too good to resist. She brushes it off, claiming she will get used to it, before stating her purpose. She abandoned her family and has been running for 2 years, arriving just recently. As for her identity, she firmly repeats that she is just Valeria, nothing more. Rika studies her face for a tense second before finally lowering her blade. She admits she still does not trust her and has endless questions left. But there is no time. She needs him, and she has already delayed too long. Ordering Valeria to stay put, Rika makes it clear she will not allow any further contact between them until she is fully satisfied. That catches him completely off guard, and honestly, we are just as confused. Her expression shifts as that familiar guilt returns, answering simply that she just does. He suggests bringing Valeria along, but Rika flatly refuses, calling this matter highly personal. The vampire will have to wait here. The two women exchange sharp looks. Valeria agrees to stay behind, though she notes that trust must go both ways. Rika snaps back, claiming she can already tell Valeria is hiding something, and warns the vampire not to dare follow them on their path. Knowing this conflict will not solve itself, he steps right between them. Diffusing the heavy tension, he agrees to go with Rika for now. Afterward, they can all regroup over breakfast to sort everything out together. He asks how long this task will take, but she avoids a clear answer. She only insists they must hurry, before he can say another word. She grabs his hand tightly. Turning back, she locks eyes with Valeria. One last time, flashing a smug, confident smile while still holding him close. She pulls him along, sprinting away from the busy center of the city. Running together, her voice drops to a quiet whisper, asking him a question. Does he trust her? She guides him swiftly toward the city outskirts, where crowded urban streets slowly transition into sprawling estates with wide plots. Moving through the quiet space, she asks once more if he trusts her. He says yes, but wonders if this urgency is about Valeria or her guilt. She mutters that if even a guy like him can read her emotions, she must be seriously losing her touch. This response only fuels his curiosity, prompting him to ask what kind of favor has been weighing so heavily. Rika pauses, weighing her words carefully, then she admits. She originally planned to explain everything and give him an escape route, but his new friend had completely changed her mind. She was not planning to tell him anything. He stared at her, trying to process this sudden shift, so she was asking him for a favor while outright refusing to explain it. He asked why she had suddenly decided to keep him in the dark, and she simply reminded him that he claimed to trust her, so he should prove it. He tried asking for just a tiny hint, but she refused. At that point, he could not tell if she was upset, annoyed, or something else entirely. Her behavior just did not line up cleanly with anything he could read. Before he could press any further, she stopped. They had arrived. In front of them stood a massive, ornate manor. A carved stone fence surrounded the property, built so high that only the upper floors were visible from the outside. A heavy metal gate guarded the entrance, and beyond it, neatly arranged flower beds lined circular carriage path leading to the front doors. He could not help but react. The estate looked incredibly impressive. He asked if she lived here, but she simply replied that she did not. She pushed the gate open and pulled him inside, closing it quickly behind them before heading toward the doors. He asked again why they were there, but she remained silent. Inside, the massive manor was dead empty. The candles had been put out, but faint trails of smoke still drifted up, suggesting whoever had been staying here had only recently left. Even so, everything was perfectly maintained. Without slowing down, she dragged him deeper into the building and then down into the basement, tightly gripping his hand as they descended. Before they even reached the bottom, he heard muffled voices, two women arguing. One insisted their group had absolutely no choice, warning that even if their target resisted, the king would execute them all if he found out. The other argued back, saying they could not force her, that she had already endured so much, and they should focus on finding another way out. A third voice chimed in that they were searching through research books, but this was not some simple problem to solve. They stepped into the room. Three women stood inside, all bearing fresh, painful injuries just like Rika. This had to be her party, Rose Thorns. One was a wizard holding a tall wooden staff, topped with a glowing blue crystal in her right hand. Another was a blonde in heavy knight armor. The last was dressed in forest green clothes, sporting long, wavy, reddish-brown hair and pointed ears. Rika announced their arrival, casually mentioning she had brought along a simple farm boy. One of them immediately noted that Rika was thinking ahead, hinting that sacrifices would be necessary. That word caught his attention. Sacrifices. Talk about a brutal betrayal. She brought him here because she figured he could survive whatever insane plan they had. He could not help but feel a mix of sheer disbelief and growing annoyance. The armored knight stepped forward, her face filled with barely restrained anger as she confronted Rika. She accused her of letting her personal issues with men cloud her judgment, saying that did not justify sacrificing an innocent person. Rika cut her off, telling her to calm down and clarifying that he was not just some random stranger. She introduced him as a new hunter, explaining that she had helped him join the guild and that she had witnessed his test results. Then she described him as completely useless in every single aspect except one, his vitality. She claimed it was on the level of a dragon. The knight instantly questioned that, but Rika explained that before she left for her. During the raid, he had rolled a 20 in vitality, and lacking other strengths, he would have needed at least 32 to pass. The knight turned her attention to him, and he hesitated. There was no point hiding it. Rika would find out eventually anyway, and after everything that had already happened, keeping secrets just did not seem practical. So he told them his vitality was at 100, though it was not fully confirmed because there was no die large enough to measure anything beyond that. The room fell dead silent as the sheer weight of it began to sink in. He recalled a saying that 90 was halfway to 100, used to show how exponential growth actually worked, widening the gap between values further and further. Rika had already told him that each tier grew massively in difference, so what did 100 actually mean? Trying to make it sound less crazy, he added that he should easily be able to help with whatever problem they were facing. The heavy silence did not lift, shock, disbelief. Doubt. It was all right there. Rika was the first to recover, trying to move things forward, but the others immediately cut her off, rejecting the claim. Outright, they simply could not accept something so absurd. Rika pushed back, insisting he was not lying. She reminded them she had seen his role herself, and that when she went back to find him, she had caught him feeding a vampire. She even mentioned that the very same vampire had followed them and was currently waiting right outside. That caught his attention, so Valeria really had followed them after all. Meanwhile, the other three remained dead silent, clearly struggling to wrap their heads around everything. They knew Rika could read people, and they knew what bloodthirsty vampires were capable of, but even that was not enough to make this believable. He glanced over at Rika, asking what the plan was now. She answered without a single second of hesitation. They would let the others cool off, and meanwhile she would tie him to a chair and blindfold him. He froze. That was absolutely not what he expected. He could not help but question her. Before he could even open his mouth, Rika was already tying him up tightly. She had dragged him down into what looked like a dark cellar in the basement. No windows, just a heavy door. The other three members of her party stood near the entrance, watching quietly as they tried to process everything that had just happened. He could not help but comment on it. So this favor she needed was for him to act as food for some monster girl. She confirmed it without a second thought, as casual as ever. That explained the guilt he had noticed earlier, especially after the way she reacted to him and Valeria. She asked if he really had to speak so plainly, and he admitted that he did. If nothing else, he figured he could at least give her a hard time for dragging him into this without explaining a thing. Her eyebrow lifted at that, and she fired right back, pointing out that he was not exactly in a position to joke after willingly letting himself get tied to a chair. She tightened the ropes a little extra, a playful spark in her eyes. He offered a quick mock apology, though neither of them truly meant it. A quiet laugh broke the exchange. The knight Rosalind stepped forward after watching their whole interaction. She commented that she was quite surprised to see Rika getting along so well with a man, considering her usual frosty attitude. She added that she sometimes worried Rika say the wrong thing and she might react harshly, yet here they were talking like this. It really sounded like she was teasing Rika about being unusually fond of him. Rika dismissed it quickly. He was nothing special. She even reminded everyone about stabbing him earlier, proving she had not softened. That seemed to raise a completely different kind of concern in Rosalind's expression, but she did not dwell on it, turning to him and introducing herself. She was Rosalind, a paladin and leader of Rose Thorns. She gestured to the others, Circe the wizard and Tala the druid. He acknowledged them, noting their small gestures in return. Then Rosalind shifted to the main point. Their friend needed help. She wanted him to help, but along with everything else, she asked him to avoid asking any personal questions. He understood immediately why she was the leader. Her composed presence commanded respect. It was difficult to refuse, even if he had wanted to. He agreed. But he did ask one thing: what kind of monster was their friend? The room fell silent. Then she answered, a succubus. He felt a strange sense of excitement at first, almost reflexive, but that did not last. She immediately clarified the situation. Their friend had been captured by succubi only a few days ago, and during that time had been turned. That changed everything. He thought it through. It was a nightmare. Succubi were all female, meaning they created more by transforming others. Rosalind continued, her tone growing sharper with absolute anger. Their friend had been targeted for her pure and noble nature. The demons even gave her the key to her own cage, letting her suffer while waiting for her to give in, yet she resisted. She chose to starve rather than lose herself and harm others. That realization settled heavily. He had been too quick to associate succubi with the lighter fantasy stories. The reality was harsh. He expressed concern, asking if she could feed on him safely. He knew he would not die, but there would definitely be consequences. Rosalind explained that was exactly why he was being restrained. By tying him down, he could not weaken her resolve. A simple kiss would be enough for her to feed, that was it. By then Rika had finished securing the ropes, no backing out now. She stated that once the blindfold was on, they would be ready. Rosalind gave Rika one last look before leaving to speak with their friend. Circe and Tala followed shortly after, leaving just the two of them. Talk about awkward, now it was just the two of them in the room. He was not entirely sure what to say, the air felt heavy. He could not clearly label his relationship with Rika, but he knew that if there was a chance of it becoming more, he wanted it. Before he could figure out how to approach her, she spoke first. She told him not to be misled by Rosalind's teasing, then explained. What succubi actually were demons that preyed on human desire. A death at their hands was anything but peaceful, misconceptions shattered. He conceded, he admitted he had completely misunderstood, and the truth made much more sense now. She laughed at his shocked reaction, telling him he would have to get used to it if they could not find a cure for their friend. He made a mental note to reconsider how quickly he trusted others, especially after her questions from earlier, but then she ordered him to stop talking and leaned right in. Her face drew close, her eyes locking onto his, and he caught a faint blush alongside a genuine smile. It was the last sight he saw before she tied the blindfold. Instantly, darkness and heavy silence followed. He wondered if she had already left, hearing no movement, not even door. He called out but got no response. She really was incredibly stealthy. Suddenly he felt a soft warmth against his lips, brief, almost fleeting, but entirely unmistakable, a gentle kiss that lingered just long enough to leave an impression. Before vanishing, before he could react, he caught the sound of soft footsteps. Quick and quiet, the door clicked shut, leaving him completely by himself. Once more tied to a chair and blindfolded, he sat in the cellar, still processing the crazy twist, and honestly, Rika just stole his very first kiss while he was completely paralyzed. Worse yet, he had been fully awake the entire time. There was absolutely no way she did not know. So she actually liked him. The realization felt nice, but only raised endless questions. Why do it this way? Still, it fit her defensive personality, always avoiding things directly, hiding her true feelings behind a bratty attitude. Yet the warmth of the kiss lingered on his lips, back. In his past life, he was never lucky with relationships. Mostly because of his own doing, he had always kept to himself. A simple kiss was not a huge deal back home, but here it carried immense weight. Still, he doubted it meant anything incredibly serious, yet just classic Rika. Eventually, the sound of the door opening broke his train of thought. Faint voices drifted into the cellar, sounding highly encouraging. They were clearly trying to convince her. That thought felt incredibly surreal. He never expected to be in a situation where people practically begged someone to feed on him. Even so, he understood her struggle. She had literally chosen starvation over hurting anyone. If he could help, he would, no matter the consequences. The heavy door closed again, and he felt the room shift. Now they were completely alone. He steadied his breathing, preparing himself. This was it. Before he could think further, a voice reached him, sounding weak and completely exhausted. She quietly asked if he was absolutely sure. He answered without a second of hesitation. He reassured her that everything was fine and that he had easily dealt with similar situations in the past. She did not need to hold back. A brief silence followed before she finally moved closer. Her physical weight pressed against him, but she felt incredibly light, barely anything there, just the fragile frame of someone starving for far too long. She softly asked if he was ready, and he gave his nod. Then she leaned close, her lips meeting his. The sudden sensation was completely overwhelming, hitting him with a rich, almost unreal sweetness as the feeding began, and layered as if every sense was pulled into the moment. Warmth spread through him quickly, too quickly, and with it came a strange heaviness like something was being drawn out of him. He could feel his strength and life being taken, and yet he remained completely aware. His body felt the strain, but his mind stayed clear. His healing worked constantly, balancing the drain, keeping him steady even as everything else tried to pull him under. As time passed, the illusion faded, the sweetness disappeared, replaced by something far more real. Her lips were no longer soft in the same way, but dry and worn down by starvation. But something else changed. She felt different, heavier, softer and stronger. He realized what was happening. She was growing. With every moment as she drew more from him, her body began to change. What had started as something fragile and barely there was slowly becoming fuller, more defined. Her presence became more solid and grounded. It made complete sense. If vampires use blood as a resource, then succubi must do something similar with vitality. Her form continued to shift, becoming what he imagined a demon of desire would look like, no longer weak or fading, but entirely complete. At some point, her lips softened again, but this time it was no illusion. She had recovered enough for it to be real. That was when another thought hit him. Just how much had she taken? Valeria had described his blood as something that felt endless, and she had only stopped because her feeding was interrupted. But this time, she was not stopping, not that he wanted her to, reminding himself why he was here. Still, as things stabilized, he made a decision. If this was going to happen, then he wouldn't just endure it. He leaned into it, letting it become something normal, not something forced or desperate, but something shared. The moment continued, steady and intense, until it finally broke, not because she stopped, but because she couldn't continue in the same way. She had grown too much. Their positions no longer aligned, and the connection naturally ended. She spoke first, her voice completely different now, carrying a warmth, depth, and a composed strength that hadn't been there before. She asked if he was all right. Before he could respond properly, her tone shifted again into panic. She started questioning what had happened to her, but quickly tried to regain control. She began repeating her name over and over, almost like she was anchoring herself. Celestine del Muriel Revelry, second princess of the Revia kingdom. She repeated it again and again, holding onto it. He stayed quiet, watching and listening until he felt it. Her body was changing again, shrinking. Her form adjusted, becoming smaller, more stable. Wait, it wasn't just shrinking, it felt controlled and deliberate. She was reshaping herself. That made sense. A succubus would need to adapt her form. Eventually, the changes stopped. She settled somewhere in between what she had been at the start and what she had become during the process. Then she apologized, saying she thought she was okay now. He told her not to worry and admitted that he had enjoyed the moment, though he wasn't entirely sure if that was the right thing to say. She seemed just as uncertain. Then she asked if she could remove his blindfold. He agreed and asked if she could untie him as well. As the blindfold came off, his vision returned, and then he saw her, blonde. Soft hair framed her face, catching and reflecting the faint light. It reflected in a way that felt almost unnatural. Her eyes were pale, clear, and calm. Open like the sky, she had a softness to her, refined and composed. But she was not entirely human, with curved horns extending from her head. Her lips still carried a faint trace of something deep and tied to what she became. She thanked him sincerely, acknowledging everything that had happened down here. Even so, she softly admits to him that this was actually her very first kiss ever. Because of that, she immediately goes on to make a sudden declaration. If he ever chooses to claim it, she is offering her hand in marriage, a total shocker. They move into the estate, and he can barely process everything that just happened. Utterly stunned, he just sits right there in the dark cellar all by himself now. Celestine literally just offered to marry him out of nowhere. And before he can even respond to the proposal, she passes out right on top of him. One moment she was speaking, and the next her exhaustion catches up to her. The girls rush in to reassure him that everything is fine. Cersei quickly carries her away, while he awkwardly tries to collect his own wild thoughts. He awkwardly brings up what had just happened with Celestine. Rosalind answers first, explaining that he might not fully understand. Since he is an outsider, she explains that a first kiss is considered a major promise. In their culture, receiving that first kiss grants him the complete right to claim her hand. But Tala immediately cuts in, clearly unimpressed by such soft rules. Tala mocks it, getting scolded by Rosalind instantly. Rosalind quickly turns back to him, but he cannot forget Tala's word. She had called them cedars, which sounds like a pretty sharp, biting insult for city folk. Rosalind clarifies things further, explaining how Tala's tribe does things. In Tala's tribe, marriage is decided by brutal combat. Beating someone half to death is how they date. Talk about intense. He glances at Tala. She's exceptionally tall and athletic, sporting beautiful tan skin and very long brown hair. Vines are braided into her hair, matching her bright green eyes. Markings cover her, and her clothes are living plants. They wrap around her tightly, leaving most of her soft skin completely exposed to view. Despite being a caster, her physical strength is undeniable, noticing him staring right at her. She stands up and proudly strikes a very confident, eye-catching pose for him. She directly explains her tribe's coming-of-age tradition. Their coming-of-age ceremony involves brutal matches where the winner claims their chosen partner. But in her case, absolutely nobody could ever defeat her, not even the tribal elders. So she left, searching for a man strong enough to conquer her. Rosalind adds that this is exactly how Tala ended up here, causing trouble from day one. She had already caused absolute chaos by challenging every single male member of the guild. They had to step in before things escalated any further. While the Rose Thorns are not the strongest group overall, Tala is their absolute best. She is their strongest fighter. Tala turns her attention back to him. Her tone shifts, catching her own slip-up. She admits surviving a succubus is impressive, but points out a flaw. The fact he can still be tied up with simple ropes proves he is weak. Tala told him to contact her if he ever became strong. Then, she mentioned, they would decide what to do about the king and princess the following day. Before leaving, he watched her go, then he looked right back at Rosalind. He joked that with Rika and Tala around, he was starting to see why Nadu said this guild had serious problems with men. Rosalind let out a slightly awkward laugh. Still, she admitted that while they all had their quirks, they were good people. The fact that Tala had not completely rejected him was a great sign. Rika getting along with him was even more surprising. She added that Circe would probably warm up to him too. He quietly agreed. Rosalind really was the anchor holding them all together. She was already planning ahead, wondering how he would fit in with the group, which made sense after he helped Celestine. Suddenly he realized something. Where was Rika? She had been totally missing when Celestine collapsed. Rosalind stood up after finally untying all the ropes and offering him a hand to help him up. She explained Rika went to deal with the rogue vampire who followed him. Rosalind wanted to stop her or send someone along with her, but Rika insisted on going completely alone. That made him pause. Honestly, he felt far more concerned for Valeria in that fight. Rosalind mentioned she was heading off to rest after their incredibly long day. Then, as an afterthought, she warned him that while she appreciated his help if he tried anything inappropriate while they slept, she would make him regret it. He quickly assured her she had nothing to worry about. Rika would probably kill him first anyway. That immediately piqued her curiosity, and she asked what exactly he had done to win over Rika's good graces so incredibly fast, especially considering they had only met that morning. He admitted he was not completely sure himself at first. She was not friendly, but things just worked out after that. Rosalind seemed to grow quite thoughtful, saying they would see how things went. She led him out of the cellar, trusting Rika's judgment enough for now. Before leaving, she pointed toward the kitchen in case he wanted food, and told him to take any empty bedroom upstairs. He wished her good night. Now completely alone in the mansion's foyer, he took a moment to assess his condition. He still did not feel hungry or tired at all. Those basic human needs felt distant, unnecessary. Still, he decided to try and eat something. Walking into the kitchen, he looked around. Nothing in there looked even remotely familiar. Still, he picked up a weird plant from a basket, which resembled a dumbbell. He took a bite, but intense bitterness hit him immediately, forcing him to cough it right out. Next, he tried a round purple fruit, looking like an apple. That was even worse, sharp, sour, and incredibly acidic. Talk about a painful taste test. It felt like biting directly into a lemon. He decided that was enough experimenting. From now on, he would eat whatever they ate. He walked to the sink and noticed actual running water. Whether that was because of this grand mansion, or advanced technology in this world, or magic, he could not tell. In the quiet night, the sound brought peace. He needed time. He poured some water, adding a squeeze of sour fruit. Before heading upstairs, he noticed most of the bedroom doors were closed. He briefly thought about checking if Erica or Valeria were inside, but quickly dismissed it. That would cross a line. Instead, he stepped outside. Finding an open balcony, he sat down just as the sun began rising. He watched the morning light slowly spread across the horizon. Day one was finally over, and it had been absolutely insane. Sent to another world meeting ninja, joining a hunter guild, and proving mostly useless. Then fighting a vampire, getting stabbed right through the heart. Defeating it, meeting elite girls, getting his first kiss, and encountering a succubus princess. Now, he was resting inside a luxurious mansion, just watching the sunrise. Surely tomorrow would not be this incredibly chaotic. Before long, the warm yellows of dawn faded into clear blue sky. His drink was still half full, tinged purple from the citrus fruit. He leaned over the railing, watching the birds in the garden. They actually had 4 wings, a subtle reminder of this strange place. That detail alone proved he was no longer back on Earth, even if the trees and grass looked fairly normal at first glance. Then again, he knew next to nothing about botany. They could be alien. He simply would not notice. He pondered this while watching them flutter. Surely there were similarities. Plants still needed sunlight and stayed green. But the exact details differed. Perhaps extra wings were needed for survival. With all these monsters around, 4 wings probably came in handy. Monster-filled worlds need adjustments. Either way, he had a massive knowledge gap. If he wanted to blend in, he had to learn. Suddenly, a voice interrupted his thoughts. Cersei stepped onto the balcony and sat behind him. She noted he was up early, guessing it made sense for farm kids. Turning to face her, he saw her clearly without her usual pointed hat. She was quite small, with pale skin, dark hair, and blue eyes. Low bangs partially covered the heavy dark circles sitting under her eyes. Wearing a simple robe, her thin frame perfectly matched a magic user. He politely asked if she could not sleep, but she snapped immediately. Pointing out the obvious, she complained her sleep schedule was ruined. That sharp response caught him off guard. Maybe she was just exhausted. Besides, Rosaline did warn him that Cersei and Rico disliked men. Still, he offered to grab her a fresh glass of water. She quickly shot back. Why would she ask him instead of getting it herself? He stopped himself from reacting. Getting irritated right now would not help. Instead, he shifted tactics, asking if she could teach him magic. She instantly shut that down, telling him to read a book instead. She made it clear she had not studied years, just for casual explanations. Keeping his voice steady, he admitted he did not know how to read. That seemed to amuse her slightly, though she still brushed him off. She bluntly told him to master reading before even thinking about magic. He clarified he was not studying magic itself. He had no mana or kai, or essence, so he couldn't actually use it anyway, but he still wanted to understand how it worked. She sighed, clearly annoyed, and told him it was totally pointless. In her view, he wasn't ever going to make it as a hunter, so there was no reason to try. Whether they cured the princess or not, he'd likely get a reward and could just live comfortably. He got her point. Still, he wanted something else. He told her that even if he couldn't succeed, he still wanted to try. He had already lived a quiet, ordinary life once, and while that had its place, he wanted something completely different now. She called him naive, saying he just didn't understand what being a hunter actually meant. He agreed with her, and that was exactly why he was asking. A deep groan, she knew he wouldn't stop. Eventually, she gave in and told him to ask what he wanted. He didn't waste the opportunity. He started with the basics, repeating what Rika had told him about how vitality relates to the body, mana to the mind, and essence to the soul, asking if they function like resources used to trigger abilities. She confirmed that was mostly correct, adding that attributes determine what you can do. He pressed further. How did they work? Were there even more attributes? How monsters like vampires functioned, and how the 12 abilities tied into everything? She questioned if he really knew nothing, and he admitted he didn't. She finally sat up slightly, still annoyed, and explained that every living thing possesses all 3 attributes, but actually having an attribute means being able to control it. A value of 0 doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means he couldn't actively use it. Simple enough. He stepped away from the balcony and sat across from her, focusing fully. He asked how abilities factor into all of this. She reminded him that he'd already rolled them, but he explained he'd been way too focused on his lack of attributes and his own vitality to really pay attention. He only knew that most of them were average, with intelligence being slightly higher. she seemed skeptical of. That but continued anyway. Abilities influence both the preparation and execution of techniques. Intelligence, for example, determines how many spells she can understand and how effectively she can use them, also affecting the strength of certain spells. He recalled what Rika had said about improving abilities, asking if mana users generally focus on intelligence. That was when she asked if he even knew what a class was. He hesitated, admitting that he didn't. She made a remark comparing an 8 to a 0, implying he might not be as perceptive as he thought, but he ignored that and kept listening. She explained that a class is simply a way of describing how someone uses their attributes and abilities. Then she listed the 12 key abilities: strength, agility, dexterity, vitality, conviction, creativity, intelligence, empathy, wisdom, perception, charisma, and luck. He made a mental note to have someone write his stats down later. She continued, explaining that abilities influence what kind of class you might pursue. For example, someone with mana and high luck might focus on chaos magic instead of arcane magic. High agility could lead to something like a spellblade. Even better, combinations of attributes open up even more paths. She went on describing how different combinations can create entirely different roles, even among people who they shared similar attributes. Some classes used just one, while others combined two or even all three. It was way more complex than he ever expected. And of course he couldn't use any of it. She pointed that out indirectly, saying this was not something he could grasp with just a few simple questions. He agreed, but still asked one more thing. He wanted to know how monsters, especially vampires, fit into all of this. Before she could answer, another voice suddenly cut in. Valeria stood at the doorway, casually leaning against the frame, suggesting that he should be asking her instead. Cersei reacted immediately, jumping up and taking a defensive stance, demanding to know why a vampire was there. Valeria calmly replied that Rika had allowed her to stay. Cersei told her to move away from the entrance, and Valeria complied, stepping closer to his side of the table. Without another word, Cersei left the balcony, clearly frustrated, shouting toward the inside of the mansion as she went. And just like that, the day had already started escalating. Can this guy ever catch a break? Valeria and he sat side by side on the balcony, while raised voices echoed from inside the mansion. Cersei was clearly upset, criticizing Rika for letting a vampire stay the night, while Rika pushed back, defending her judgment. He glanced at Valeria, trying to keep their conversation grounded while ignoring the argument happening about her just a few steps away. He asked if Rika had really allowed her to stay. She confirmed it, explaining that it came after answering a long series of questions, many of them personal, that did not sit entirely well with him, and he told her he would talk to Rika later. He apologized if the questioning had made her uncomfortable. She admitted that it had, but reassured him that it was fine and that he did not need to bring it up. Apparently, Rika had promised not to share anything she said. That caught his attention. Why would Rika promise something like that? He started to ask what exactly had been discussed, but before he could finish, the argument moved onto the balcony. Cersei immediately pointed out that Valeria was still alive, clearly implying that Rika's judgment had been reckless. Rika dismissed the concern, saying the outcome proved her right. She even added that if Valeria had lost control, she would have gone straight for him, not Cersei, and then casually mentioned how Valeria reacted when drinking his blood. That was enough to make Valeria visibly flustered. Cersei pressed the issue, asking how Rika could not see the problem, but Rika remained firm, stating that Valeria wasn't a threat and had no harmful intent. Both of them looked toward Valeria, who was still trying to recover from the embarrassment. Rika asked if there was still any doubt. Cersei gave in, though not willingly. The tension eased just enough for everyone to sit down. He ended up between them, with Valeria to his right, still flustered, and Rika to his left, looking entirely too pleased with herself. Across from them sat Cersei, still clearly annoyed. After a moment of silence, he decided to move things forward. He asked what the next steps were. Cersei answered first, saying she still was not sure if it was even possible, but she would continue researching a way to turn a succubus back into a human. Rosalind added that they would also need to inform the king, but that was going to be tough since they couldn't bring Celestine along. He asked why, and Rika immediately pointed out that Celestine herself absolutely hated being around men. In fact, they had cleared out the entire mansion before bringing her here, but then she added he was the sole exception. Since Celestine couldn't hurt him, he would have to be her food source. Talk about a wild realization. So this was his actual life now. He had reincarnated into this fantasy world, but instead of becoming a legendary hero, he had ended up as a food source for two different kinds of monsters. Not exactly what he had planned, but he had to face reality and adapt. He told them he would help, but on one condition. He wanted to get stronger. He mentioned Valeria had already agreed to teach him blood arts, which immediately set Cersei off. She accused Valeria of taking advantage of him, pointing out that as her food source, he was essentially giving her power while getting nothing in return. Valeria pushed back, clearly offended, insisting she had not deceived him. Cersei dismissed it, arguing that vampiric magic was an innate racial trait. Definitely not something a human could ever learn. Valeria corrected her, calling it blood arts, and insisted that even though it was tied to vampire nature, it ran on Kai. Vampires do not make Kai naturally, but that did not mean could not be taught, especially since he would use his own energy. The two of them continued to clash, neither willing to back down. Valeria pointed out his vitality made this situation unique. There were cases of humans learning abilities from other races, and since both vampires and he lacked Kai as a usable attribute, this might actually work in his favor. He backed that up, saying this was one of the best opportunities he had. He was already here for Celestine, so if they could help him too, it would mean a lot. Cersei looked at him, clearly unconvinced, but also outnumbered. Eventually, she gave in. Though reluctantly, she told him not to bother her too much and warned that once Celestine was cured, any support from her would end. Before he could respond, two more voices joined in. Rosalind teased Cersei for being unexpectedly cooperative, while Tala simply stated she did not understand why. Since he was still weak, Rosalind tried to keep the tone light, but Tala did not seem interested in softening her words. Cersei clarified she was not doing it out of kindness, but because he was necessary for Celestine's condition. Rosalind and Tala took their seats, completing the group. Everyone was there now except for Celestine. Rosalind mentioned she had checked on her and confirmed she was awake but had chosen to stay in her room. Then she took control of the discussion. She recapped all the events that had unfolded so far. They saved the princess and wiped out her captors, though they still needed to figure out why she was specifically targeted. Following that, they had relocated here and brought him in as a sustainable source of energy for Celestine. She hesitated slightly when describing his role, and he could tell it was not easy for her. He reassured her there was no better way to put it. She nodded in agreement and continued. They had to inform the royal family, and even with the chaos, she believed they had. With the best possible outcome secured, she quickly assigned roles. Rosalind, Tala, and Cersei would go speak with the king, while Rico stayed behind to watch over both Celestine and him, ensuring neither left the property. He couldn't help but realize that this basically put him under house arrest too. She apologized, explaining they simply couldn't risk him vanishing. At the same time, she pointed out that the estate was plenty large enough for him to train with Valeria privately, and with Rico staying behind, he would have more than enough to occupy his time. Rico reacted instantly to that comment, clearly not appreciating the implication. Rosalind brushed it off, bringing the meeting to a close. With that, the plan was set, and everyone began preparing to move. He stood in the backyard with his arms at his sides, fists clenched and elbows bent, trying to focus. A loud, exaggerated shout escaped his lips, anything to gather energy, or at least something resembling it. Honestly, he was just copying what he had seen in anime, hoping something would click. Rika and Valeria had already given him a basic explanation about feeling Kai and the flow of blood in the body, but translating that into action was proving to be a different story. He pushed harder, raising his voice again and putting more effort into it, but nothing changed. He finally exhaled, admitting it just wasn't working. Rika, lounging upside down on a nearby bench with her legs hooked over the backrest, pointed out the obvious. From her perspective, he was just yelling in a garden and expecting something to happen. Valeria sat beside her, leaning forward with her elbows on her thighs, doing her best to guide him. For her, blood arts were as natural as breathing, but for him, it felt like trying to consciously control every heartbeat. She told him to focus on his heart, to feel the blood moving through his body, flowing through arteries and veins, and how Kai moved with it. He tried, but only his stubborn heartbeat answered. Rika adjusted the explanation. telling him he was focusing too much on blood. Itself, as a human, Kai existed throughout his entire body, not just in his blood. She described it as a system with lungs, heart, stomach, and brain, all working together in balance. Even with that, he admitted it still wasn't clicking. Rika reminded him that he didn't even have a Kai attribute, so expecting results in a single day was unrealistic. For now, he just needed to focus on feeling the flow. Valeria added that there was no rush and that he would get it eventually. That was fair enough. He sat down in the grass, leaning back on his hands and looked over at the two of them. After a moment, a thought crossed his mind, and he asked if there was some kind of demon king trying to take over the world. Rika answered immediately, mentioning someone named Nyxos. And yes, there really was a demon king. That tracked. She explained that he called himself a god of darkness and was gathering demons, devils, and other monsters, but made it clear he was far beyond his level. Even their party avoided him, leaving that kind of threat to heroes. As she spoke, he couldn't help but recall his encounter with the Overseer of Death. Since arriving this world, his sense of fear had dulled significantly. Part of that came from knowing death wasn't the end, but more than that, he had already stood before something far beyond comprehension. Compared to that, everything else felt. Even so, there was no way Leon could fight a beast like that. He changed the subject. He asked Valeria about her previous blood attack, specifically how she made that dagger. He had to understand blood control. Valeria explained that liquid blood was easily manipulated by other powerful enemies, but hardening it made it stable, as tough as pure iron. Yet it stayed lightweight. Incredible. Leon raised his palm to try. He pictured his own blood flowing out to form a sharp blade. Wait, he remembered something. She chanted for her massive area attack. But for the dagger, she did not say a single word. Basic techniques were simply second nature. No chanting required for those. Rika chimed in, pointing out that this rule applied to every skill. True mastery meant zero verbal activation. Silent casting was the ultimate goal. This had clear advantages, especially for assassins. Leon stopped to think. If that was true, he needed a proper starting point. He asked Valeria to teach him actual blood arts instead of shouting. She frowned. Nobody had ever told him to start yelling like that. Today was meant for quiet meditation, but she finally agreed to demonstrate. She spoke the chant slowly, guiding him through each step. Crimson blood pooled in her palm, instantly solidifying into a blade. Amazing. Leon immediately tried to replicate it, repeating the chant confidently. Absolutely nothing happened, not a single drop. Talk about awkward. Behind him, Rika started giggling. She teased him about his secret move. Leon cringed. How much of that pathetic struggle did she actually see? He had spent a really long time getting beat up before she arrived. She shrugged it off, pretending she had absolutely no idea. Valeria was totally confused by the name. Rika called it his special finisher. He instantly denied it, desperately trying to steer the focus back. He asked if any blood art could cover his body in spikes. Valeria sighed. She had never heard of anything so incredibly wasteful. Rika quickly countered that Valeria's own flashy attack was pretty wasteful too. This sparked a sudden, petty argument between the two girls. Then Valeria mentioned elite noble class techniques, stopping herself instantly. She had clearly said too much. Leon assured her there was no pressure. Still, he had to ask, would feeding her more blood make her stronger? Yes, she explained that noble vampires possessed ancient bloodlines and massive power. This extra strength placed them at the absolute top of the food chain. Then she snapped back, telling him to train instead of gossiping. He needed to focus on the magic, not the chatter. She was right. Standing back up, Leon reset his posture and chanted steadily. He closed his eyes, focusing entirely on his own heartbeat and flow. He remembered getting stabbed, the sudden, desperate reaction of his body. That wild surge of raw energy that shattered the metal blade. He chanted continuously, seeking that internal rhythm, but his mind drifted. He doubted the method. Vampires naturally utilized the energy in their blood, along with natural control, but what could a human like him do? What if he didn't try to control it at all? What if he simply triggered it? No precision, no shaping, just release, not like a controlled dagger. Something more instinctive and raw. He spoke again, adjusting the chant, slightly following the direction of his thoughts. This time, something responded. A fierce reaction ignited inside his chest. No structure, no control, and no attribute guiding it, just force. Then came pain, like countless sharp points tearing through him from the inside, spreading outward. All at once, there was zero time to process it. Everything went dark. As he slowly regained consciousness, his senses returned piece by piece. First came the intense soreness. Pain lingered throughout his body, and he could feel something wet beneath him while a soft warmth cradled his head. Voices reached him next, though they were distant and unclear at first. Fragments of conversation drifted in, broken and indistinct, but he could tell two people were talking nearby. As his awareness sharpened, he recognized them as Rika and Valeria. It even sounded like Rika was quietly laughing. Then his eyes finally opened. The first thing out of his mouth was a simple complaint about the pain, which only made Rika laugh more. She pointed out how predictable that was, questioning why it had taken him nearly 2 minutes to wake up, even though his body had already healed. Valeria cut in, telling her not to overwhelm him, admitting she did not understand how he survived, but saying it did not matter as long as he was okay. He took a moment to look around. He was still in the garden, lying in a pool of his own blood. Rika stood to his right, looking down at him without any concern. He could not tell whether that was reassuring or slightly worrying. A bit farther back, he spotted Celestine keeping her distance, clearly still unsure about being close to everyone. From the way she was positioned, it seemed she had been watching from the mansion and rushed out when he collapsed. He could still hear Valeria but could not see her at first. Then he tried to move his head and finally realized where she was. The warmth beneath him was not the ground, it was her. She had knelt in the blood to support his head on her lap, her thighs on either side of him like a cushion. When he looked up, their eyes met. Her expression was full of relief and happiness, her red hair falling around his face, catching the sunlight and forming something like a curtain between them. She asked how he was feeling. All he managed to say was a simple greeting. Talk about an incredibly awkward way to wake up. Was not entirely sure how to respond to it. Then Celestine cleared her throat and stepped forward, breaking the atmosphere. She addressed Valeria and asked to take over, stating that as his fiancé, he should be resting on her. Instead, he asked what a fiancé was, which only made things more complicated. She explained that it meant they were to be married since he had been her first kiss. Valeria, clearly confused, repeated the key points, trying to process what that meant. Rika stepped in, explaining what a kiss was in human terms and comparing marriage to the bond between parents. That explanation hit Valeria all at once, and her expression shifted rapidly into panic. She questioned how something like that could already be decided when they just met, and she immediately declares that she's going to kiss Leon too. The moment she says it, her face flushes, realizing what she just blurted out. Celestine objects right away, insisting that things do not work that way and emphasizing the high value of a first kiss. Leon feels the entire situation spiraling. Honestly, who wouldn't panic when things escalate this insanely fast? There is no way both girls are seriously talking about marriage over a simple kiss. This is clearly just emotions running wild rather than anything real. Rika steps in, again looking completely irritated. She points out they are getting way ahead of themselves, reminding them they barely know him and questioning whether they even understand his actual situation or feelings. That brings both of them crashing back to reality. They look at each other, realizing how far they went. Valeria admits she has no claim unless it was truly mutual, and acknowledges that what happened was about survival, not something she could demand more from. Celestine also admits that she might not fully understand the real significance of a kiss yet. Seeing them back down like that makes Leon feel a bit guilty. He does not want to flat out reject them, but he cannot just jump into something as serious as marriage based on this. He slowly sits up, still feeling pretty sore, wanting to ease the heavy tension. He tells them honestly that he would be lucky to have either girl, but he is not ready for marriage. Thinking fast, he adds that his first kiss was actually stolen from him earlier, so technically he cannot make any decisions on that just yet. That immediately shifts the conversation. Celestine reacts strongly, demanding to know who took it. He tries to downplay it, saying it is not important, but that only makes her focus on it more. She points out they just agreed on how crucial it is, and now she wants to know what this means for them. He admits that what they shared was only his second kiss. Right then, he notices something. Rika, who is standing off to the side, suddenly turns bright red and looks away, so she did not know. She was not trying to take anything from him earlier. She was actually giving him something of her own. That Realization settles in quietly. Meanwhile, Valeria and Celestine are still fully focused on their interrogation, trying to understand how human customs work. Valeria wonders if kisses are shared mutually, while Celestine starts thinking in terms of claims and even suggests buying that claim. Talk about a wild negotiation strategy before he can properly respond. Valeria counters with her own plan, insisting she will take his kiss back and give it to him properly. At this point, things are clearly spiraling again. Their argument picks up, and Leon can see where this is heading. And he is absolutely not ready for it. Suddenly, Valeria's stomach growls. That perfect timing gives him an escape route. He immediately suggests taking a break to get some food, using the excuse to redirect the chaotic energy. For once, it feels like the situation might actually calm down, or so he hopes. Things do not get any less awkward. If anything, they get worse. Leon finds himself sitting on the edge of the bed, squeezed right between Celestine and Valeria, with no escape. Even after leaving the garden, their intense arguing just does not stop. By the time he returns inside, they are still bickering. They cannot decide who gets to eat first. A compromise is reached, but it is just a temporary ceasefire, no real peace. Their solution: both feet at once. Celestine climbs onto his lap. She angles herself sideways, draping her legs over his right thigh. Her hip presses right against him, leaning in close enough for him to feel her warmth. One of her hands rests gently on his chest, while the other carefully cups his face. She does not force him closer, but instead settles in like she belongs right there. Behind him, Valeria kneels on the mattress, locking her knees around his hips and pressing hard against his back. She holds him without a shred of hesitation. Her arms slide over his shoulders, wrapping around him completely in a tight, possessive grip, as if she refuses to let him go. Trapped between them, he finds himself entirely pinned down. And yet the bickering continues. Celestine demands the front spot to kiss him, while Valeria argues she can drink more from his neck. She questions why her access should be restricted. He tries to understand this madness, but something deeper seems to be driving their intense desperation. So he speaks up, trying to bring them back to reality. There is no need to rush into marriage, he says. No matter what, he will never abandon either of them. He believes marriage must be about love, not just survival. But even as he speaks those words, he knows this might complicate things even further. He refuses to build their relationship on survival. Suddenly, both girls fall quiet, their faces softening as embarrassment washes away all the previous tension. They were literally just warned about this, yet fell right back into it. Valeria speaks first, confessing her intense jealousy when she heard Celestine call herself his fiancé. Everything happened so fast, she explains. And after finally finding kindness and trust, she feared she was losing it. Celestine speaks next, admitting to a very similar fear. Seeing him resting on Valeria's lap triggered her own deep insecurities. She confesses her childhood dreams of finding true love, despite being a royal princess where such things are impossible. Becoming a succubus made it feel even more unreachable. She was terrified of losing her one real shot at happiness. Hearing their quiet confessions, the underlying truth finally becomes painfully clear. They are not just bickering, they are terrified, and he has done nothing to reassure them. He admits this failure is entirely his fault. Instead of making them secure, he let things spiral to this point. No wonder they're clinging so desperately. Before he can say more, Celestine sits up straight and leans in close, filled with determination. She tells him not to apologize, then speaks her mind clearly. Even if she is not ready for marriage, or if things change, she will choose him right now, whether she is human or succubus. Then, without missing a single beat, she suddenly drops a massive bombshell. She will accept Valeria as a second wife, knowing she loves him too. His face burns instantly. A second wife. Behind him, Valeria leans over his shoulder, tilting her head with a soft smile as they lock eyes. Her expression was bright, free of the earlier tension, and she did not mind even suggesting that Celestine could be the second, reminding Leon that regardless of romance, their pact already bound them. He tried to process it, but his thoughts fell behind. The tension and insecurity from before had vanished, yet somehow they had arrived at an even more intense conclusion. They moved closer, both of them now relaxed and playful. Their earlier worries were replaced with something lighter. Then they asked what he thought. Leon hesitated, but only for a moment. In the end, he gave in and admitted that he accepted both of them. Honestly, he would be lucky to have either one. They exchanged a quick glance, their expressions lighting up with excitement. Just like that, they turned it into a competition, declaring that the battle her first wife would be fair. Valeria added her own challenge, calling Celestine her rival while still accepting her as something close to a sister. Talk about wild luck, because in this new world, Leon had found himself in the middle of the most absurd yet strangely perfect situation imaginable. With their laughter returning and their tension gone, the two of them finally settled down, ready to begin feeding. In theory, this should have been a terrible situation. His essence was being drained by a succubus, while a vampire fed directly from his artery. For anyone else, this would have been a slow and painful death, but he had already left death behind. His healing had erased the pain minutes ago, leaving him with a completely different kind of challenge. Do not move, stay calm, they are only eating, nothing strange here. That thought did not last long. A soft sound broke through his focus, and he immediately regretted trying to stay calm. The two monsters with him were Celestine and Valeria, both of whom had not long ago declared themselves his fiancées. Celestine had once been a holy princess who chose to starve rather than lose herself after becoming a succubus. Valeria, on the other hand, was a vampire who avoided human blood and whose innocence came out most when she was embarrassed. Neither of them should have been ready for anything close to intimacy, and yet here they were, unintentionally putting him through the most overwhelming experience of his life. Focus, he had to think about something else, like bloodless, his new move. Celestine's lips rested softly against his, her breathing uneven and fragile. Every so often a small, involuntary sound slipped through as her fingers traced along his jaw and into his hair, holding on to him as if she needed the contact to steady herself. Her body leaned into his, careful despite the hunger guiding her actions. He remembered how the others had restrained him the last time she fed, worried about what her abilities might do, but he had already adapted to that. This was not the same situation anymore. His hands stayed at his sides, gripping the sheet so tightly his knuckles turned pale. Behind him, Valeria pressed close, her arms wrapped around his chest. Her fangs had pierced his neck, and although her saliva slowed his healing, the pain had already faded. What remained felt less like injury and more like a faint pressure, almost like a hesitant, lingering touch. If it had just been that, he could have handled it, but every time she swallowed, her entire body reacted. Small sounds escaped her, louder than Celestine kept pressing closer with every tiny movement, radiating an impossible to ignore warmth. He wondered how they made this so hard. They were just feeding, but still. Celestine shifted slightly, sliding her leg just a little higher across his own. Valeria tightened her hold, pressing her body even closer against his back. He felt his composure slipping away. That was when Valeria noticed. She lifted her head, quietly asking if having both of them at once was too much. Celestine followed right after, her lips hovering near his as she asked the exact same thing. He wished they would not phrase it like that, admitting it was a bit much and suggesting they take turns. Then for some reason he went and added that last part. Why did he even say that? Celestine responded softly, her lips brushing his as she spoke, showing she understood far more than she let on. Valeria, however, responded with a much more innocent vibe, reminding him not to back out of their deal, adding with a bright laugh that things were fine as long as she got to go first. Celestine made a quiet, competitive sound. In response, insisting they would alternate, he internally begged them to keep arguing. He desperately needed a break. Instead, Valeria leaned right back in, pressing against his neck again. Celestine immediately matched her move, deepening her own contact to stay in the game. They were not just competing, they were fighting. He practically prayed for a distraction. The intensity climbed a bit too high, and with tension high, his body reacted before he could stop himself, pulling away slightly. Apologizing and admitting they should probably stop for now, both of them paused immediately, their rivalry fading as they pulled back. He told them honestly that they were overwhelming him, not dangerously, but in a way he was not prepared for. Valeria lowered her head, clearly starting to understand. Then she asked quietly if they could just stay like this for a little longer. Celestine agreed, saying they had already taken enough and just wanted to remain close for a bit. He exhaled and nodded that he could handle. Celestine rested against his chest, her cheek near his collarbone, while Valeria shifted to his other side, no longer wrapping around him, but still close, her head resting Against his back, honestly, it turned out he was way less prepared for this than they were. For a while, none of them spoke as the moment settled into something calm and quiet, and he finally let his hands move, resting them gently around them both. Then Valeria spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper, saying she thought she had won this round. Celestine immediately disagreed. He let himself fall back onto the bed, giving into the situation entirely as they leaned over him, still focused on their rivalry. He warned them that if they started another competition right now, he would do something, he was not sure what. But he would figure it out. They both smiled at that, agreeing on a truce until tomorrow. Talk about a wild daily routine. Then Celestine leaned in. Celestine quietly thanks him for not going too far, while Valeria quickly adds her own gratitude. They press close to him, their warmth spreading right through him. They rest against his chest. He closes his eyes. Yes, this really is his life now. And somehow, believe it or not, he is genuinely looking forward to this new life. After feeding on his blood and running on almost zero sleep from the entire night before, Celestine and Valeria eventually drift off. Unconsciously, the two of them crawl right up against him, settling in as if he were their pillow and gently pinning him down. He is pinned in place, trying to sleep along with them, but rest refuses to come. He still feels hunger and thirst, but his physical form does not actually need them. Sleep feels exactly the same way, a completely useless luxury for his body. He simply lies there, holding them close while they quietly drift off. The room slowly fills up with the warm, golden glow of the setting sun. When they finally wake, their earlier boldness vanishes, replaced by a deep shyness. Without a single word, they untangle themselves. They slip away quietly. They quickly go to make themselves presentable after waking up. To him, this quiet, bashful side of them feels a lot more natural. Maybe waking up next to him like that was simply too intense for them to handle. He leaves the bed and heads straight back to the quiet courtyard. They got caught up in jealousy, add in hunger, and it makes sense. He returns to the exact garden spot where he previously used Bloodless. Most of the crimson stains have already soaked deep into the earth. Seriously, can you blame him for thinking his current situation is absolutely ridiculous? He went from zero dating experience to suddenly managing 2 potential wives. Maybe even 3 if things keep escalating. He quickly shakes his head. He is getting ahead of himself. The main focus is getting stronger. He takes a deep breath, steeling himself for the inevitable torment ahead. Without any hesitation, he begins the chant and triggers the technique again. Agony rips through his body. It tears him apart from the inside. His vision goes black, but he manages to regain consciousness much faster. Everything goes dark, but he regains consciousness before hitting the hard ground. Groaning quietly, he cannot even muster the strength to cry out in pain. Burning sensation is still awful, but somehow it feels slightly more manageable. Maybe his quick recovery skill is doing its job, but he stands right back up. He repeats the process, falling, recovering, and standing back up again. He pushes forward again and again until he finishes 10 agonizing repetitions. Suddenly, a familiar voice calls out. Rika remarks that he is not doing bad. He looks around, trying to locate her but seeing absolutely nothing. She reveals herself hanging upside down from a tree branch with her legs hooked. Her long ponytail dangles near the grass as she explains she was keeping watch. She reminds him that protecting him remains her duty while the others are away. He thanks her, she accepts it, but immediately demands a reward. He can easily hear the smug and playful teasing loaded in her tone. Playing along, he asks her what exactly she wants from him. She begins probing, asking if he has been keeping any major secrets from her. That catches his attention. Is she talking about him being from another world? He responds cautiously, acting completely clueless about what she is hinting at. Rika pushes harder, claiming she already knows the truth and demands complete honesty. Now he must decide, is she bluffing or does she actually know? He points out that if she already knew, she would not be asking. She quickly counters that maybe she is just testing his loyalty. That sounds exactly like her, but this secret is not something she could guess. He suddenly realizes he is actively probing her right back, and she notices. Immediately, honestly, he had to admit she completely outmatched him in this verbal sparring. But if she really did know, coming clean might actually help him. There was just too much. About this new world he didn't grasp, so he finally folded. He told her if she didn't believe him, that was her problem. She shrugged, repeating that she already knew. Then, right as he opened his mouth, she finished his sentence, stating flat out that He was from another world. Before he could even process that, she immediately scolded him, calling him way too naive for revealing something so massive without a second thought. Especially when she hadn't even confirmed her suspicions first. He sat up totally baffled. He pointed out the crazy contradiction. She demanded honesty but was also criticizing him for giving it. She clarified that the issue wasn't his honesty but his absolute lack of guard. He should have deflected, or just claimed it was personal. Sighing, he collapsed back onto the grass, staring up as she smoothly dropped from the branch to stand directly over him. Then, her voice softened just a bit. She admitted she probably should have thanked him, first admitting he was far more genuine than most guys she had met. There was a subtle blush creeping onto her cheeks, even in the dim forest light. It was barely there but definitely noticeable. Knowing her reputation, he easily guessed the source of her awkwardness. If he had to guess, it was tied to some painful memories in her past. He wanted to tease her, but he could tell she was genuinely trying to manage her emotions. Yeah, that was definitely the wrong move. A sudden, sharp pain pierced his chest as she casually stabbed him again, but his rapid healing instantly pushed the blade right back out. She complained that speaking her feelings aloud only made things worse. He groaned, asking where that came from. She pulled her dagger back, declaring them even. He joked she was lucky she was cute. That immediately earned him another strike. She coolly pointed out that blow should have been fatal. She added that if he weren't an otherworldly summon with abnormal abilities, he would be a corpse. Then she sat right down beside him, her flustered mood completely gone. Her knee brushed lightly against his, just enough that he knew it was fully intentional. She explained her party was among the absolute top-ranked in the entire Federation, and that normal citizens didn't know about humans being summoned here to act as heroes. That instantly grabbed his attention. So he wasn't alone. However, she quickly clarified his situation was entirely different. Most summoned heroes were raised by powerful nations, unless he had simply been discarded. His case made no sense. He explained his origins, how he died saving a kid and was transmigrated afterward, even admitting he was specifically told to find her. A flash of guilt crossed her face, making her feel slightly bad for stabbing him earlier. He just laughed it off, teasingly calling her a bratty sunder. She didn't get the reference but promised to stab him again later anyway. He smiled, saying it was a genuine compliment. Ignoring his jokes, she kept explaining, not all heroes were otherworldly summons. Every race had strict biological limits, but those who surpassed those boundaries could keep growing indefinitely. Tala was the perfect example, recognized as a supreme prodigy for doing just that. Hearing this made him wonder where he stood. With his immense vitality, he should have tons of potential, but according to her, that was the exact mystery. Every single one of his other stats was completely average, and he had no attributes. The only way she even connected the dots was because he told her about meeting death. She admitted he was difficult to read, which was why it had taken her time to piece it together. Still, he couldn't help but think that 2 days wasn't exactly a long time. He asked if most heroes were from other worlds and whether that applied to other races too. She explained that, as far as she knew, it was only humans. Other races had natural advantages, while humans didn't. People believed humans produced more heroes, but in reality, it was because they were the ones being summoned. He asked if he should keep his origin a secret, and honestly, she was totally right. It was a lot to take in, but it all fit together in a way that made sense. Still, there was one thing he needed right now. Since she already knew everything, he wanted her help to get stronger. She smiled and agreed, telling him she was there for that. Rika tossed a basu into the dirt, and as he watched it land, she began explaining that this was Jave Hay, setting the foundation for everything that followed. After he told her he was from another world, she had agreed to teach him about this one, and now she continued by explaining that Jave Hay was the capital of the Revia Kingdom, ruled by the Revelry family, Celestines parents, and that everything around it followed a structured layout. As she spoke, she used another basu to carve a line from the northeast to the northwest of Jave Hay before bending it southward, explaining that this marked the partition mountains, and then, along the west side of that line, she began hatching the ground to indicate the primeval forest. She then poked several holes around the city, placing some along the mountains and forest, and a few more to the south and west of Jave Hay, explaining that these represented towns and villages, each controlled by their respective nobles, who were allied with the Revelry family, while also noting that Revia was a major exporter of ore and lumber. As he took that in, he reasoned that the locations along the forest and mountains were likely tied to resources, while the ones to the southwest were probably focused on agriculture, which she immediately confirmed by explaining that food was the biggest import in the region, since, even though there were farming villages, being a northern nation meant food became scarce during the winters, and right there, things finally clicked for him because when he first met Rika, she had commented that he looked well-fed, and at the time he assumed it was just an observation, but now it was clear that food scarcity made that stand out more than he realized. He then considered his situation and suggested that, given the whole farm boy misunderstanding, he could just say he was from one of those villages, but she immediately pushed back, saying that if anyone asked, he should simply not tell them because she would rather he didn't lie. That confused him, so he pointed out that she had just told him to keep his old life a secret, and she responded that this was exactly why he shouldn't tell anyone, adding with a slight edge that he owed nothing to anyone but her, which he noticed slipped out way more possessively than she probably intended. She continued, her cheeks faintly red, explaining that the forest ended at the Black Sea while the mountain range extended southeast, and as she drew an oval at a slight angle, forming an upside Y shape between the mountains and the lake, he recognized the geography almost immediately, even though he wasn't. As an expert, he understood enough to connect it to tectonic plates, specifically where colliding plates formed mountains and separating ones created deep seas. So when he pointed out that the corner looked like a swamp, her eyebrows shot up in surprise. Rika confirmed it was indeed a swamp, and added that it was Ainamur, Valeria's fallen homeland. Rika assumed Valeria had already told him, but he clarified that he had simply pieced it together from basic geography. That led her to assume he had studied to be a cartographer, but he explained that he had actually studied a wide range of subjects. Naturally, she asked him why, although he admitted it was hard to explain. He quickly shifted the focus back to the map, noting Valeria's home. Rika studied him for a moment before letting it go, explaining that those swamps were once a human kingdom until their head mage turned into a lick, ultimately his own creations. The first vampires slew him. He made a mental note to ask Valeria about that later, but for now, he pointed to the empty space between regions. Rika snapped at him to stop interrupting her. She was getting to that. Then she drew a line from the middle of the sea eastward, marking the border with the Griff Empire. She extended it sharply upward before curving it inward to form a bay connected to the northern mountains. This was the western coast, and Crescent Bay, which fully completed the Federation's border. His attention was piqued. He asked about this federation, and she explained that because of Nyctos, the V Kingdom allied with 4 other nations. There was once a 5th ally, Vera, but it fell last year. She quickly clarified that while Vera was technically saved by the Empire, it was far more accurate to say they were conquered during a massive battle against demons, then absorbed completely. Continuing her explanation, she extended the coastline southwest past the Empire's border, identifying the region as the demonic territories. This was where Nyctos first appeared 100 years ago, conquering the land and declaring himself the god of darkness. He had been at war with the world ever since. Honestly, he felt incredibly lucky to have been placed so far away from that. There was no way he could stand against a fallen overseer. That was a problem for actual heroes, not him. She added that before Nyctos, there was no empire or federation, only scattered warring nations. While things had changed some, independent nations still remained. Then, with precise, familiar detail, she sketched 7 islands west of the bay, explaining that this was the archipelago of stars. Each island functioned almost like its own faction, locked in constant war with one another. It was once her homeland, though she had left it behind. He almost questioned her about it, especially since she brushed past it so quickly, but he remembered his promise to Valeria. It would be unfair to press Rika on something she wasn't ready to share yet. Instead, he told her she could talk whenever she wanted, suggesting they return to the Federation. That immediately triggered a sharp response, as she snapped that she wasn't telling him anything was important right now. She claimed it did not even matter if he knew, though. Her flushed cheeks made it completely obvious there was a lot more beneath the surface. She quickly changed the subject, warning Leon not to interrupt her again or she would stop teaching him altogether. Then she threw 4 bowls into the ground to mark the remaining regions, explaining that along the northern coast lay the Greenmere Kingdom, with Asuha to the south, Metroku in the center, and Zaxura south of Revia. Every kingdom ruled itself independently, but benefited from free trade within the Federation. Midway through her explanation, she suddenly perked up and muttered that they were getting close. She complained that people would think she lost her edge because of him. This immediately put Leon on alert, making him ask what was going on. When he asked if the others were back, she confirmed they were, and they had company. She told him to get presentable because the last thing he wanted was to make a terrible first impression on the royal family. He made his way back inside the mansion, although no one had arrived. Yet he trusted Rika enough to know things would not stay quiet for long. Stepping further inside, his mind immediately shifted to something more practical. Honestly, what are you even supposed to wear in a massive place like this? One glance down at himself, and he immediately realized the major issue. Since his only outfit was completely riddled with holes from using bloodless, now he had to choose. It was obvious he needed something new, but the bigger issue was finding it on such incredibly short notice. Digging through rooms and wearing someone else's clothes felt like crossing a line. Then, out of nowhere, the sound of horses cut through his thoughts. When he looked outside, he saw 4 horse-drawn carriages entering the mansion's roundabout driveway. At that point, he let out a quiet sigh and accepted the situation. He did not really have a choice anymore and would have to search the mansion for something to wear. Moving through the halls, he could already hear activity on the main floor, with people rushing around and shifting furniture into place, which only added to the pressure. Eventually, he came across the servants' quarters, where neatly kept maid and butler outfits were stored, likely left behind by the previous staff. He paused to compare his options, and though wearing someone else's uniform was not ideal, it was still better than torn rags, so he settled on a butler outfit, reasoning that at least it was a proper suit. After finding one clothes enough to his size, he changed quickly. By the time he finished, the noise downstairs had begun to settle, meaning he could not afford to waste any more time. Making his way down the stairs, he took in the busy scene, noticing maids and guards moving, but something stood out. Almost immediately, he realized they were all women, and their uniforms did not quite match. Before he could process that, 3 guards suddenly surrounded him, their hands resting on their weapons as they demanded answers, ordering him to raise his arms and explain how he got there. He did exactly as they said, lifting his hands while calmly stating his name was Leon and that he arrived first. Though he knew exactly how weak that sounded, just as the tension built, a familiar voice cut through the noise, and from behind the guards, Rosaline stepped forward and ordered them to stand down, explaining that Leon was an exception who they would soon be assigned to protect as well. The guards stepped aside, giving him a perfectly clear look at her, and he welcomed her back while she casually thanked him before questioning why he was dressed like a butler. Wondering if Rika had put him to work, he explained that he needed something presentable with the royal family arriving, but her response made it clear that his idea of presentable was far from adequate, informing him that Celestine's mother, Queen Licentia Miriana Revelry, the king's first wife, was here. The moment she said that, he felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach, because she was not someone he wanted to meet under these circumstances. He tried to reassure himself that he could still make a good impression, but Rosaline immediately shut that down, telling him that the queen already disliked him. That hit harder than expected, and the knot in his stomach dropped like a stone, leaving him with a single resigned thought: this was going to be a huge problem. Before he could dwell on it, Rosaline told him to follow her and led him through the corridors until they reached a door where Valeria, Rika, Tala, and Cersei were already waiting. As he approached, he could hear raised voices coming from inside, and when he asked if everything was all right, Cersei explained that things had started off well, but once Celestine mentioned being promised to him, the situation had quickly turned tense. That only made things worse in his mind, since they hadn't even met, yet he had already made a terrible impression, and while part of him wanted to point out that he was keeping Celestine alive, he knew that would not exactly win him any favor. Rosaline added that from the queen's perspective, her daughter had been kidnapped, turned into a monster, and was now completely dependent on young Leon to survive, which meant she likely believed there was a conspiracy with him at the center. Talk about a nightmare scenario. He couldn't help but think things were already beyond saving. Rika, on the other hand, simply wished him luck before signaling to the guard inside that Leon had arrived, and she quickly instructed him on what to do inside, telling him to kneel, keep his gaze down, and formally present himself. A moment later, the guard announced his presence, loudly introducing him as a commoner, and with no time to hesitate, he stepped inside and immediately followed Rika's instructions, dropping to one knee. Before he could even finish his introduction, Celestine interrupted, declaring that he should stand because he was her fiancé, but her mother immediately shut that down, insisting he remain kneeling as a commoner. The presence of royalty, even going so far as to accuse him of deep deception and suggesting he confess so his death could at least be painless, Celestine defended him without hesitation, insisting that he was not deceiving anyone and was an honorable man who was willing to suffer for her sake, but her mother dismissed that, arguing that as a princess, Celestine had no reason to lower herself and that any such sacrifice should come from duty, not as a claim to marriage. Celestine countered by declaring she had already given him her first kiss, which in her eyes gave him the right to marry her, but her mother rejected that entirely, comparing it to something trivial and insisting that he was manipulating the situation to secure her hand. She went further, arguing that his restraint was part of a larger deception and that Celestine was too naive to believe that a man who appeared only 2 days ago just happened to be the one person capable of keeping her alive. Celestine stood firm, insisting that it was fate, while her mother dismissed that outright, claiming it was all orchestrated, and for a moment the room fell into a tense silence as the two of them locked eyes. Watching them, he couldn't help but understand the queen's perspective, because at the end of the day she was a mother protecting her daughter, even if that also meant she was a queen who had the power to have him tortured and executed. Eventually, she addressed him, directly telling him to stand and take a seat, because she wanted to hear exactly why he had arrived in Fei and how he was able to sustain Celestine without dying. Her voice carried a sharp edge that made the air feel heavier, and as he stood and looked at her properly for the first time, the resemblance between her and Celestine was undeniable, as she looked like a more mature version of her, equally striking in her own way. He took a seat as instructed, but she didn't waste any time, immediately making it clear that this was his last chance to tell the truth, and that if she found any fault in his answers, he would end up wishing for death just to escape what would follow. Honestly, you'd easily have forgiven anyone for mistaking Queen Lacynthia Miriana Reverie for nothing more than a trophy wife, and even as he looked at her, he could understand why. Because her beauty rivaled Celestine's, and both of them carried an elegance so effortless that it felt almost divine, but even he knew that assumption would be a serious mistake. There was no way a king would tolerate a liability at his side, and Lacynthia was clearly anything but that, because everything about her presence suggested refinement and control, the kind that only came from a life of deliberate preparation. She had been raised as a noble, trained in politics and prayer, in manipulation and performance, in both appearance and deception, and now, with her daughter's future on the line, all of that refinement had sharpened into something far more dangerous. Compared to that, he couldn't help but feel out of place, because the extent of his experience with politics came from watching the evening news, and the closest he had ever come to scheming was finding ways to avoid schoolwork. Still, he reminded himself that he couldn't afford to be intimidated, because this wasn't some grand political battle, and at its core, it was just a mother worrying about her daughter. He steadied himself and explained that he wasn't planning anything underhanded, and that he had come to the city to become a hunter, which was how he met Rika and ended up involved in all of this. She immediately pressed further, demanding specifics about where he had come from before arriving in the capital, making it clear that vague answers wouldn't be tolerated, and that she wanted names, places, and dates. That was exactly the kind of question he had been hoping to avoid, especially after Rika had told him not to reveal about being from another world. So Leon hesitated before admitting that his past was private and that he would rather not say. That answer went over terribly, as expected, because the queen responded sharply, making it clear that refusing to speak was not an option she would accept. At that point, Leon could not help but mentally complain about Rika's timing. It would have been helpful if she had at least given him a believable cover story. Celestine quickly stepped in, protesting on his behalf and pointing out that Leon was her fiancé and the one keeping her alive, but her mother immediately countered that argument, questioning how someone unwilling to even reveal their origins could be trusted. Leon tried to clarify that he was not against telling her, but he had been instructed not to share that information. This only made things worse because from her perspective, that just reinforced the idea that Leon was hiding something suspicious. Even as he spoke, he could tell his explanation was not helping. Part of him wondered if staying silent would have been a better option. When the queen asked who had told him to keep it a secret and why it needed to be hidden, he hesitated. Dragging Rika into this did not feel right to him, even if it might have made things much easier. Before he could say more, a fourth voice cut into the conversation. Henrika appeared from behind his chair, casually pointing out that despite how terrible he was under pressure, Leon had not lied or tried to shift the blame. Her sudden appearance caught everyone off guard. The two maids beside the queen immediately moved to protect her, only stopping when Lucynthia raised her hand to signal that it was not necessary, reminding Rika of the formal meeting, but Rika brushed it off, casually explaining that she had expected Leon to struggle and had stepped in to help, while also taking the opportunity to criticize the queen's spies for their lack of skill. The maids reacted with visible embarrassment, making it clear that Rika had seen through them entirely. Leon could not help but notice how comfortable she seemed in front of the queen, suggesting their relationship was quite familiar. Rika then moved from behind him and took a seat right beside him before casually revealing the truth, stating that Leon was from another world. Talk about a curveball that caught Leon completely off guard, especially after everything she had said earlier about keeping it a secret. She described Leon as a natural hero, mentioning that Cariel had brought him here, which might explain why he was otherwise useless, aside from not dying. The queen responded by mentioning that the last silence had only brought 4 other humans into this world before, each claiming to be daughters of Cariel and riders of the apocalypse. This only added more confusion to the situation, because Leon was still trying to process what any of that meant. Rika dismissed the concern, pointing out that if he could deceive her, then the queen or her spies had 0 chance of uncovering the truth. Rika added that Leon's confusion about even the simplest things proved he was not capable of orchestrating something this elaborate. Celestine turned her attention to Leon, confirming that he was from another world and that Cariel had sent him to J. Fei. Leon explained that the Overseer of Death had introduced himself that way and had instructed him to find the deadliest person in the Hunters Guild if he wanted to become a hunter. That naturally led to Rika, which tied everything together in a way that seemed to satisfy Celestine, because she turned back to her mother with a look of triumph and declared that the gods had sent her a hero, a traveler from another world who could sustain her when she needed it most, insisting that it was fate. Leon briefly considered correcting her about calling the overseers as gods, but he quickly decided against it, because that felt like a conversation that could cause more problems than it solved. The queen responded cautiously, stating that while she was not fully convinced, she would allow him his freedom for the time being, but she made it clear that he still had no right to marry Celestine. Celestine protested again, accusing her mother of being hostile and refusing to give him a fair chance, but Licentia remained firm, stating that while he would be rewarded for helping her daughter, she would not allow Celestine to remain as she was, and that she intended to cure her and find her a husband. Hearing that, he could not blame her, because from her perspective, he represented the circumstances that had led to her daughter's suffering. Still, he decided to speak up, asking if there was any way he could prove that he was worthy, while others worked on finding a cure. Before Celestine could stop him, the queen responded by pointing out that as a princess, Celestine could not marry someone of lower standing, and that even considering such a match would require him to reach at least the rank of duke. Celestine objected immediately, but her mother countered that if he truly wanted to prove himself as a suitor, then he should be willing to meet that standard. Rika leaned in and quietly explained that a duke was the highest noble rank beneath royalty, which only made the challenge seem even more unrealistic. Even so, he asked if it was possible for him to become a duke, and the queen confirmed that it was, explaining that commoners who completed Herculean trials could earn nobility for their descendants, and that reaching the rank The Duke would require either multiple lesser trials or one of the greater ones. That raised an immediate question for him because he did not understand why. The reward would go to his descendants instead of him. Celestine answered that question directly, her gaze fixed on her mother as she explained that it was because no one survived any of the 13 trials. Celestine and Licentia stood locked in a silent glare, and he could feel the weight of it pressing down on the room because it was obvious that the queen had set trials so extreme that they were never meant to be completed, but rather to prevent this marriage from ever happening. As he processed what that implied, he realized that these were the kind of trials where the reward was promised to his family because he was never expected to survive them, and that thought sat heavily with him, especially since not dying seemed to be the only thing he had going for him so far, even. So he found himself stepping forward, stating that if completing one or more of those trials was what it took to be worthy of Celestine, then he would do it. Although he was not entirely sure if that had been the right thing to say, neither of them reacted in a way he could easily read, because their expressions seemed to. Their expressions showed both approval and irritation at once, but for completely different reasons. Rika cut in, pointing out that while his words sounded pretty bold, he might want to actually understand what the trials were before trying to act like a hero, which was a fair point. So he asked what those trials actually were. And the queen answered directly, listing 3 conditions he would need to fulfill to become a duke and prove himself worthy of proposing marriage. For a moment, he genuinely thought something had gone wrong with whatever was translating for him, because the term she used sounded pretty unfamiliar, almost like another language entirely. Celestine stepped in and clarified, her tone sharpening as she explained that her mother had essentially told him to either slay the god of darkness, defeat a creature capable of destroying entire kingdoms, or retrieve the crown of Vera from the Empire and restore the Valyrian royal family. Hearing that, he immediately dismissed option 1 as impossible. And since he had no idea how to approach the third, he focused on the second and asked how strong a catastrophe-level monster actually was. Rika covered her mouth, clearly trying not to laugh, while Celestine and her mother resumed their argument as if his question had barely registered. The queen insisted that regardless of whether he was a hero or not, it should be obvious that he was completely unsuited to be a husband for Celestine, while Celestine pushed back firmly, stating that he was her fiancé regardless of the trials. Lysynthia made it clear that neither she nor the king would ever approve of the marriage, and Celestine responded just as firmly that she didn't need their blessing. The tension between them settled into a heavy silence, and for a while no one spoke, leaving the room in an awkward stillness that felt like it stretched on forever. Eventually, a knock at the door broke that silence, and a maid entered, bowing before informing the queen that dinner would be ready soon and asking if she wished to prepare. Lysynthia ended the discussion there, saying that they would revisit the matter later, but not during dinner, and with that she stood and left the room, her attendants following closely behind her. The moment the door closed, Celestine grabbed a pillow and threw it at the door in frustration before crossing her arms and slumping back into her seat, clearly upset. He figured he should say something to ease the tension, maybe lighten the mood a little, so he apologized for what had just happened. She brushed it off, saying it was fine and that her mother was just worried about her, although from his perspective it still felt like a pretty extreme way of showing it. Talk about an impossible challenge. She essentially told him to go get himself killed, which she admitted, but tried to frame it quite differently, suggesting that things might improve. Celestine didn't agree, insisting that her mother would never change and that everything always had to be her way, and he could see how deeply that frustration ran. He looked to Rika for help, but she simply shrugged, clearly choosing not to get involved, which meant he had to handle this himself. So he told Celestine that he would consider himself incredibly lucky to marry her, and that even if luck alone wasn't enough, he was willing to go through those trials to prove it, because to him she was worth it. That seemed to soften her because she uncrossed her arms, leaned forward, and took his hand in both of hers, her expression becoming gentler as she told him that while his words were sweet, he needed to understand that her mother was not testing his worth, but was instead trying to get rid of him. Even knowing that, he said he would just have to prove her wrong. Rika chimed in right then, pointing out that this was exactly why she called him a farm boy, since even rose thorns could not handle a catastrophe-level monster, and while keeping a succubus and a vampire fed was impressive, it did not mean he stood a chance against something like that. He countered by pointing out, she said a dragon had a vitality of 32 and that he was already far beyond that, but she clarified that dragons were only considered hazard-level threats, explaining that while they were powerful, they were more about offense, like massive flying creatures capable of turning entire streets into rivers of molten stone. That aligned with what he understood a dragon to be, but it also raised another question, so he asked what hazard level actually meant, and while he was at it, requested a full explanation of the trials, monster rankings, and anything else he needed to know. Celestine and Rika took turns explaining, with Celestine starting by outlining the hierarchy of nobility, beginning with royalty at the top, followed by Duke, Marquis, Count, Viscount, and Baron, and she added that these ranks had become standardized across the Federation, even though some noble families still resisted the system. Rika followed by explaining monster rankings, listing them from Apocalypse down to Pest, and she pointed out that Nyctos was the only known Apocalypse-level threat, while groups like Rose Thorns could only reliably handle hazard-level enemies, and anything beyond that required multiple elite groups working together. Celestine then went into detail about the trials required for each noble rank, listing specific conditions for Marquis, Count, Viscount, and Baron, each with their own set of challenges. As she continued, he could feel his head starting to spin, because while he had asked for all this information, it was quickly becoming too much to process at once. Trying to focus, he asked which of those trials involved killing a dragon, but Rika explained that none of them did. Although if he managed to capture and train one for the Federation, he could earn the rank of Viscount, and that is the whole chapter we can recap for now. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, and if you want more Manhwa recaps like this, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new videos. Thank you for watching.